Welcome back to Silent Moon Wisdom, the place where we step away from the noise of the world and quietly listen to ancient Zen stories like cool drops of water falling into our thirsty minds. Tonight, I invite you to gently set down the layers of pride we wear each day, layers we think protect us but only weigh our hearts down. In modern life, we're taught to be confident, to assert our ego, so no one looks down on us. But somewhere in that endless race, the self grows larger and begins to consume us. We stop listening. We stop learning. We stop seeing anyone as good enough but ourselves. And we don't realize each time arrogance rises, our hearts shrink like a sealed jar that leaves no room for fresh water to flow in. Pride and ego are invisible ropes tying our lives to suffering. They make us fear being inferior, fear losing face, fear being forgotten. They push us into endless battles to protect the image we built, even at the cost of true peace. And when the applause finally fades, we find ourselves exhausted in a desert of vanity, more alone than ever. So tonight, as you lie down and close your eyes, let these ancient Zen stories gently guide you inward. Let each old word be like a breeze at night, sweeping away the dust of pride so you can breathe lightly, sleep deeply, and wake with a softer, wider heart. And now, let us begin with the first story, The Arrogant Soldier. War drums thundered under the crimson dusk, cheers rising like ocean waves. At the end of the dirt road, the young soldier appeared on horseback armor, darkened, flecked with dried blood like stamps from past battles. Children followed like sparrows, tossing wildflower petals. Mothers pressed hands to their chests, exhaling relief that their men returned alive. The village men shouted his name hoarse with pride. Each time it happened, the drums pounded, flags waved, and new tales were spun around the fire. This young soldier always won, always drove the enemy back with one swing of his sword. At first, he only smiled shyly. He told the children, "I'm just doing a soldier's duty." But applause has its own kind of spell. It blooms warm like fire, then seeps into the heart, the bones, the fingertips. Gradually, he felt taller, his voice heavier, his steps firmer. The village seemed smaller beneath his boots. Friends turned into spectators. At the well in late afternoons, he would glance at the old blacksmith's bent back and think, what does he know of battle? Passing the training field at dusk. He smirked at recruits fumbling with commands. These kids have never seen blood. When the gray-haired commander asked for his input on strategy, he nodded only out of courtesy. Their advice felt like wind through a thatched roof, loud for a moment, then gone. That dry season news came. The enemy had gathered in Tralu Valley, a lowland between two hills, a river curling through like a faded silk ribbon. Scouts warned the enemy had changed tactics, no longer storming in like hungry wolves, but scattering drawing foes into the reeds. The commander spread a map on the table, calloused fingers, tapping faded black marks. We must be cautious. Do not pursue deep. Split our formation. Stay in contact. The young soldier leaned on a postcoat, open chest swelling. Cautious sounded too much like hesitant. He spoke boldly. General, we've crushed them many times. The valley is narrow. If we strike hard like a hammer on an anvil, they won't stand a chance. Some young eyes lit up. His prestige flashed like a freshly sharpened blade. The commander paused, then half nodded. Better to be cautious. But cautious sank under the chatter while strike hard blazed like fire on dry grass. The night before they marched, the moon was a thin leaf behind clouds. In the tent, A teammate quietly mended sandal straps. Scouts say the tra-lu reeds hide false ground, thin crust over swamp. If we charge blindly. The young soldier laughed, clapped his shoulder. You worry too much. This isn't a picnic. We'll be fine. Dawn cracked like a red egg. The column moved, dust swirling like threads of gold. The valley opened peaceful as a grain-drying mat reeds, swaying river, glinting thin smoke from the duck huts far away. False peace always wears a cool face. He jerked his chin forward. Trumpets blared, ranks pressed tight like waves, no enemy in sight. Only rustling grass boots whispering like countless insects. Then the first arrow hissed past his ear, the second stuck before his toes. The third came silent with the thud of a man falling. The enemy didn't rush. They struck like old hunters bite vanish. Stab, melt away. Advance, he shouted. Advance swallowed hold formation. The line stretched like a pulled cord front, bunching middle thinning, rear fraying. And the reeds hid false ground. Dry roots laced over black mud. Armor-heavy boots tore through. Mud opened jaws, swallowing legs mid-step. That stunned instant was all the enemy needed. A gong clanged thin from upwind spears rained down like falling shadows. He spun, cut one spear, slipped on slick earth. He still believed speed, strength, courage could save this. Belief is a red line of paint or a blindfold when you must see the pit. Someone screamed, back to the line, but the line was a tangled root ball. Someone called his name. It drifted like a leaf on water. Too late, he knew there was no line to return to. Every man was an island, and islands drift. He stepped back heel on something cold, discarded iron or a dead beast's rib, he couldn't tell. A heavy blow on his shoulder nerves froze. Sword slipped like a fish from a basket. He grabbed too late. A body crashed his side, dragging him down. Above the sky was blue and heartless. He crawled into thick reeds. Rotting mud stung his nose. Hot blood smell clung. Groans thinned to rasps, then cut off. Enemy voices steady as distant rain. Push right. Peel layer by layer. Peel layer by layer as calmly as peeling an onion. He watched comrades peeled. His layer would come. He held his breath. Reeds were a thin blanket they hid, but couldn't hide a heartbeat. A spear jabbed the reeds-pierced air, withdrew, jabbed again. He pressed flat. Mud soaked his spine with cold. For a moment he wanted to leap up, roar, charge as always. But roaring would only paint a target. He swallowed it with the blood taste. Afternoon faded. River sounds returned. Insects reclaimed the stage. He didn't know who was left alive. Sometimes soft rustles, maybe comrades crawling, maybe snakes seeking sun. He remembered the village road. The blacksmiths bent back by the straw stove. Children tossing petals. His chin lifted high. Those memories gleamed like wall paintings. Now he wanted only one small thing, a hand gripping his wrist, pulling him from the mud's mouth. But no hand came. No one knew where he was. No one had strength left to search. He coughed dryly. What is freedom if no one is left to call your name? Dusk sealed the valley like a pot lid. Enemy campfires bloomed purple, then gold, then orange like a painter swapping brushes. Firelight striped his mud-black armor. He closed his eyes, felt heat rising from scattered flames. Sweat stung down his brow like salt. He heard enemy sentries counting off. Even steps, husky voices. Winners are never in a hurry. Night thickened, not soft like the rice fields at home, but dense, scorched, damp like a narrow earthen cave. He decided to crawl. No plan, just away from the trap's mouth. Mud hissed softly under him. A reed scratched his cheek. A bug slid inside his collar. 10 breaths, 1 arm's length. 20 half more. The night's length was his only fortune. Dogs barked far off. He turned toward it, then heard a faint click to the right. Metal on metal. A torch swept the reed's predator's eye. Light brushed his face. He sank deeper. Heart hammered like it would bubble through the mud. The torch passed. Oil stench lingered, then thinned. By dawn, he was still there. Cold gnawed knees, numb, crept up thighs. His shoulder throbbed, swollen. Each breath sliced his chest. He felt a deep tired, the kind of tired from walking far only to find he'd gone in circles. He recalled a saying from the old commander, "Victory never guarantees the next battle. Survivors are those who learn while they still breathe." He laughed silently. He had not learned, only counted victories. Gray light rose. Mist weighed down each reed. A strange horn sounded. Black dots moved at the edge, not birds. Figures emerged from fog. No shouts. They walked like men at work. One pointed. One nodded. Spears lifted. His hiding reeds trembled as if sighing. He knew it was his layer's turn. He searched for anything to fight with. His fingers touched a sword hilt, sunk deep in mud. He tugged unmoving, fingers numb. He let it go. Picked up a stone heavy as every praise he had ever inhaled. Strangely, he felt no fear. Fear had been spent last night. Only a thin stillness sharp as a blade's edge. In that stillness he heard himself whisper to no one, "I wish I had listened." The reeds parted. A young face appeared, thin beard, brown eyes. His spear froze midair. For a blink, they stared. Mud cracked on the soldier's face like tiny maps. Sweat beaded on the others like trapped night dew. Then the spear lowered. The youth stepped back, waved. 2 others came lifting the young soldier by the arms like a heavy sack of grain. He did not resist. His knees buckled. The stone fell. Mud splashed, then went still. They tied his hands with coarse rope, 1 loop, then another, fast, neat knots. The rope bit into his wrists, a sharp pain, real pain, like a test to prove he was still alive. They shoved him out of the reeds. In the pale morning, the battlefield came into focus. Armor shells lay like shattered turtle carapaces. Boots stuck sideways on the muddy bank like bitten-off footprints. Flags snapped off like old flame tree branches after a storm. A few of his own were dragged out too, eyes open but seeing no more. He didn't dare search for familiar faces. He feared meeting the gaze that had once looked at him with absolute trust. They marched him toward the riverbank where a low planked boat waited. A quartermaster counted in a dry voice. 1, 2, 3. At 4, someone whistled. The whistle was nothing like the blaring horns from the day he returned to the village. It was flat as an old thread, strong enough to stitch a bag shut, cold enough to cinch a wrist tight. He looked up. On the slope, the enemy soldier who had looked at him earlier was tightening a rope across a stake, movements practiced. The young man turned to a comrade and said something very softly. A small laugh drifted out light as chalk dust. None of them looked at him as a hero or a great foe. They looked at him as a person, a captured man. When the sun lifted over the ridge, the mist burned off, revealing a tender green sheen on the water. The boat rocked. They forced him to sit. The rope tightened. Wood creaked. Across the river, children chased one another, their laughter carrying slowly over the water. From a thatched roof came the scent of braised fish, gentle as memory. Suddenly, He remembered village meals, amaranth soup, ash-roasted sweet potatoes, a piece of fish charred at the edges. Such ordinary things he had barely noticed before. Now each small detail flickered like a tiny flame in the cold morning. A figure stood on the bank above black long-coat silver hair, their commander. He looked down at the soldier without hatred, without pride, only the weariness of a man who had stood too long facing both sides of the same death. He signaled. The boat pushed off, oars dipped, the river's surface cracked into silvery streaks, erasing the shoreline's trace. No cheers. No one called his name. Only the slap of water against the hull like small hands too weak to clap. Only his own disappointed eyes reflected faintly in the water and smearing each time an oar swept past. At the far end of the bank, a black crow lifted from a rotting stump, beat its wings 3 times, and vanished into a cloudless patch of sky. He watched it go and wondered if on that first day home he had kept one fewer word bowed, one moment longer listened to one more warning. Would this boat have appeared in his life? The river kept the answer. It flows for no one carrying every question to a place where answers are not required. The boat rounded a bend. Tralu Valley receded, shrinking to an old ink stain on a closed page. Ahead, the sky opened white and glaring like a fresh sheet not yet written on. He closed his eyes. Behind his lids, the old war drums also closed. No thunder, no grand finale, just silence like a story ending where it needed to be quiet. You know that failure wasn't only the failure of a single battle. It didn't stop at losing a fight or land or rank. It was the failure of his own heart, a heart once fervent, once willing to risk life for comrades, once brave enough to move forward through storms of arrows, slowly swallowed by arrogance, bit by bit, quietly, like a sweet disease. For arrogance rarely arrives like a storm. It comes like fog slipping into every thought. At first it whispers, "You're better than they are." Then it says, "You don't need to listen to anyone." Finally, it breathes the cruelest line, "You don't need anyone at all." And when he believed that, his heart began to rot. He no longer shared worries with his comrades, no longer sat by the fire to hear them talk about home, no longer felt the need to bow with humility before the gray-haired teacher who had taught him how to hold a sword. He thought the distance he created was a symbol of strength, but in truth, it was the cold wall isolating him from every warm hand once reaching toward him. So, the thing that hurt him most wasn't losing a title or being stripped of rank, nor being led away as a defeated man. It was turning back to look and realizing that during those arrogant days, he had driven away the very people who once cherished him one by one. Not because they betrayed him, but because he pushed them away. Not because they turned cold, but because he froze first. He once believed he needed no one until he fell. Only then did he grasp the truth. Strength isn't standing alone at the summit, but still having hands beside you, even when you collapse. Yet when he needed a hand, no one stood there anymore. And that empty space, the place where smiling faces should have been, was the deepest, quietest cut of all, and it hurt more than any wound on his body. Have you ever felt like that soldier? Not amid clashing steel and gun smoke, but in the calm days of ordinary life. Sometimes, after a few quick successes, a big project win an early target, hit a compliment that leaves you floating. You start to believe you already know it all. At first, you brush off a small piece of feedback, thinking the other person doesn't understand you as well as you do. Then meetings and conversations start to feel unnecessary. You stop listening to anyone, stop caring about sincere reminders, lose interest in learning anything new. You believe you're good enough that humility is no longer needed. And at that very moment of seeming brilliance, you don't realize you've stepped onto the slick slope of arrogance, where each self-satisfied step quietly pulls you downward, no noise, no warning. I've met many people like that. They once shone brightly, were praised, surrounded by a circle of admirers, and then dimmed just as quickly. Not because they suddenly got worse, not because their talent vanished, but because they no longer had anyone beside them to guide, to reflect, to tell them to stop when they were veering off course. They lost the living mirrors that had shown them their limits because they shut their eyes to those mirrors. Arrogance is like an invisible wall. At first, it seems to protect you from criticism, from hurt, from self-doubt. But over time, it doesn't just block criticism. It also blocks the love of those around you, the ones who dared to offer feedback, who wanted to help, who hoped to go farther with you. And when no one is close enough to catch your hand and pull you back, each small mistake slides into a widening crack until you fall alone and cannot understand how you once had everything and now have nothing. The most dangerous part of arrogance isn't that it drives others away, but that it keeps you from seeing you're losing the very people you need to grow. Because no one grows up alone, and no one stands long if the walls around them have hidden every hand that once stood ready to lift them. Today's success does not guarantee tomorrow. That's not a pessimistic warning. It's a cold fact of life that many only recognize after the first fall. That soldier long ago believed a string of victories was a permanent shield, that yesterday's glory would protect him forever. But life doesn't work that way. Life doesn't keep you at the top because you once deserved to be there. It demands that you keep deserving it every day. And every moment, whether you're at the peak or at the bottom, is a new hand dealt with rules no one announces in advance. When you're arrogant, you think you already know. And that's when you stop noticing, stop learning, stop staying alert. An arrogant mind looks only straight ahead, eyes glued to its own path, blind to the open pits at the edges, blind to storms forming quietly on the horizon. You may move fast, but only fast toward disaster, not far toward growth. A humble mind, by contrast, keeps looking around. The humble don't think they're inferior. They simply know the world is much larger than their ego. So they keep listening quietly, observing, steadily adjusting each step with patience. And for that reason, they seldom collapse because they never walk alone. Do you see it? The humble always have teammates. There's always someone to point out mistakes, someone ready to steady them. When they stumble, someone willing to slow down to walk beside them. But the arrogant, even with a crowd cheering, are actually walking alone because applause never follows you to the end. Success without humility is a tower built on sand. One big wave, a disruption, a failure, a misstep, and it all collapses in an instant. But a humble heart is bedrock, holding you steady when storms rise. So don't let today's victory make you forget tomorrow's fragility. Let each step be guided not by applause, but by the quiet learning of a heart that knows how to bow. I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself gently, do you sometimes feel exhausted from always having to prove you're better than others? We think pressure comes only from failure, but it can be heavier when we live inside the costume of success. When you strain to be smarter, faster, more impressive, your eyes fix on the race, and you forget the faces that once walked beside you. You stop speaking honestly with anyone because comparison keeps buzzing in your head. You stop daring to ask questions afraid others will think you're lacking. Little by little, you raise invisible walls to protect your strong image. And those same walls keep you from touching love, sincere feedback, and the hands that would have guided you further. Are you losing precious relationships simply because you can't hear anyone but yourself? Maybe someone once quietly warned you that you were going too fast, trading too much. But you brushed it off, thinking you knew better. And then when you stumble, you turn around only to see empty space. Not because they no longer care, but because you pushed them out long ago, with each dismissal, with each, "I don't need guidance." Have you noticed that beneath the outer confidence, there can be a heart trembling, afraid of losing, afraid of being forgotten? Arrogance isn't always born from strength. Often it's a mask for fear. Afraid of losing admiration, you try to look perfect. Afraid of being left behind, you rush on, no longer sure where you're running. And in that race, you abandon the one thing that could have taken you the farthest: humility. If this is you, then you understand why the soldier failed. Not because the enemy was stronger, but because he no longer knew how to be humble enough, to learn to listen enough, to change, to recognize who could help him grow. And the most painful part wasn't the fall itself, but realizing he had dismantled with his own hands all the hands that once stood ready to lift him. The ancients said, "The deeper the water, the calmer it runs. The wiser the person, the humbler they become." That saying isn't urging you to be timid or self-doubting. It's a reminder of true strength, the strength of inner stillness. Humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's knowing your worth without needing to flaunt it, keeping your heart wide enough for the world to enter, and being at ease enough not to build proud walls to hide the fear of being outdone. The humble don't think they're lesser than anyone. They simply know that everyone they meet carries a shard of knowledge, an experience, a viewpoint, and if they listen, they can learn something. The arrogant do the opposite. They shut every door and imprison themselves in a tiny room called the self. True victory isn't about being better than someone, but about no longer needing to be better than anyone. Only when you stop comparing do you have the time and strength to go far and to keep the precious people beside you. The wise don't need to stand on others' heads to appear tall. They grow in quiet like deep water, and that humility is the firmest foundation for every lasting success. Maybe right now, you're successful, admired standing on some summit. You may be praised, held up as a model. But remember, the wind blows strongest at the top, and with one misstep, you can fall faster than you climbed. The irony is, the higher people stand, the easier they forget the ones below who helped them up each rung. Lose humility, and you lose not only the ability to listen, but also the people willing to steady you when you sway. The only thing that can keep you steady at the summit isn't applause or reputation or even talent. It's a humble heart. Keep that heart soft. Only a soft heart won't crack under pressure. Only a soft heart knows when to step back to bow and learn. And only a soft heart can travel truly far. Not alone, but with those who still walk quietly beside you, even after the spotlight fades. Dear friend, I'd like to invite you to set aside the day's noise for a moment and sit quietly with me for a few minutes. Just a few minutes. To hear an ancient story. The Buddha once told a story that seems light like wind gliding through a morning forest. Yet inside it hides a cold, sharp blade that can cut through the proud cloak we unconsciously put on every day. Imagine a quiet forest at dawn. The sun hasn't fully risen, only laying down its first rays, thin as liquid honey, over leaves still heavy with dew. The Buddha and his disciples walk silently through that scene, each step so light it doesn't stir a single blade of grass. Dewdrops tremble atop the tips of grass, glinting like tiny pearls. The air smells of fresh soil, damp wood, and just opened leaves. The whole forest seems to be holding its breath. Then, a bird song rings out so clear it's as if the sky just dropped a crystal bead. The disciples stop and look up. Far away in an open patch of grass, a creature appears, as if from a dream, a peacock. It is fanning its tail. Each long feather forms a radiant fan, reflecting the early light with hundreds of eyes, sapphire, deep violet, gold, and emerald. Every step it takes seems carefully measured, graceful, proud. With no music needed, it dances its own dance, the dance of beauty that knows it is beautiful. The disciples whisper, "We've never seen a creature so magnificent." The Buddha doesn't answer, only watches quietly. And the peacock, it knows all eyes are on it. And it likes that. Every day at first light it leaves its roost, not to forage like other birds, but to find the still pool in the meadow where it can see its reflection. It tilts its head, fans, its tail fixes each feather. The wind has misaligned, admiring its posture, like a king reviewing troops. Whenever a starling or sparrow darts past, it glances lightly, its eyes glinting with pity. Common creatures, and the little birds, even if they don't know what that look means, instinctively avoid it and fly farther away. High above, near the crown of an ancient tree, a jet-black crow often stands and watches in silence. Its gray-black plumage has nothing to boast of. No colors, no patterns, no gasps of admiration. No one notices it, and no one harms it. Each morning, while the peacock is still straightening its tail feathers, the crow has already flown far to find food, gliding over fields and canals, returning to its nest as the day inclines. It is not beautiful, but it survives. Not eye-catching, but sufficient. Not celebrated, but at peace. Then one particular morning, the forest's tone changes. First, an unusual breeze, not a forest wind, dry, laced with ash, recalling grass fires on distant plains. Then footsteps, light, even, rhythmic, not the hurried leaps of wild animals, but like someone tapping a counting stick. Finally, a faint thread of cigarette smoke drifts low between layers of leaves like a whispered death notice. Hunters. The birds around them stir at once. Small wings hiss through the air, hurrying to hide in dense canopies. Brown starlings shoot into thick bamboo. Flocks of sparrows slip into rocky crevices. The crow does the same, claws gripping the branch-tight body, pressed to the highest nest, black eyes, still as mountain stone. Only the peacock does not. It hears but doesn't listen closely. It knows but can't be bothered to care. It thinks, who would dare harm a creature as splendid as I am? So it calmly steps into the open, fans its tail, and begins the dance it believes is the most glorious on earth. The hunter stops, eyes narrowing through the leaves. His back is used to long vigils. His gaze no longer trembles at radiant life. His hand raises the bow. The string draws tight, humming softly like a snake constricting prey. The arrowhead thin steel flashes a cold glint like the claw of night. Just a single whiz light as a snapped finger. The peacock doesn't take off in time. Its splendid tail feathers burst into the air like firework shards going dark. Its body falls heavy, broken. A fresh streak of red spreads across the green grass, staining even the proud reflection it loved to admire each morning. Birdsong stops. The whole forest holds its breath. The crow remains high and still, black eyes blinking, not happy, not sad. Simply quiet, like one who has seen it all before. The Buddha steps closer. He stands a long while by the peacock's body, as if listening to something that has just dissolved into the earth. The sun is higher now, reflecting on the once brilliant feathers now dusted with dirt and blood. A few tail plumes still half fan, as if trying to finish the dance left undone. He turns to the disciples, his voice slow, even and deep like a distant bell. Do you see? Its very beauty made it careless. Its pride made it forget fear. And because it forgot fear, it forgot how to protect itself. The disciples bow their heads. Inside, something tightens, a different kind of silence, not the forest's silence, but their own, as they catch a glimpse of themselves in the peacock lying on the green. Because you know, sometimes what kills us is not the enemy's arrow, but the applause of the very crowd that once praised us, applause that lulls us into the intoxication of pride until we can't even hear the footsteps of fate drawing near. I'm telling this story not to make you pity the peacock, but to ask you to pause and consider, is there a chance that in this life you resemble it? Are you so busy displaying your beauty, so intent on proving your specialness, that you no longer see the dangers quietly approaching like arrows drawn in the dark? Are you pouring all your strength into making others marvel, into chasing applause, into standing on a high stage, and forgetting that applause cannot shield you from life's arrows? We live in an age where other people's gaze seems more important than our own breath. An age that keeps urging you to shine, to stand out from the crowd, to be different, to make the world look up. Social media turns every day into a stage where everyone strives to become the most perfect version of themselves, for likes, shares, and lavish compliments. You might spend hours editing a photo, choosing the priciest outfit, decorating your life to look dazzling to the world. But have you ever asked yourself, is being stand out truly safe? Because when you stand out too much, you also become a target. Like the peacock, the more radiant, the easier to fall into the archer's sights. Like stage lights, the brighter they burn, the more they blind you to the darkness around you, keeping you from seeing the exit when trouble comes. Splendor can draw eyes, but it can also blind you to danger. And ironically, the more obsessed you become with your crafted image, the more you neglect your inner defenses. We think standing atop the light is safe, but in truth, that's where the wind is strongest. A place where one lapse can send you falling faster than you climbed. Meanwhile, the humble who stay quiet below unnoticed often live longer, sturdier, and at peace. So, before you push yourself to shine brighter, ask, am I building a firm foundation, or just planting a flag on a windy crag? Not everyone who stands out is strong. Often they're only hiding a thin, trembling heart, waiting for the first arrow to arrive. The crow is not beautiful. It attracts no one, doesn't glimmer in sunlight, has not a single feather that makes people gasp. Yet that very ugliness becomes an armor that quietly protects it. No one notices it, and no one aims at it. No envy, no stalking, no schemes to bring it down. To the world, it has nothing worth stealing, and that is precisely what sets it free. It has nothing to prove. No dance, no spotlight, no demand that all eyes turn its way. It only needs to live. Each morning it flies out to feed, steady as breathing. Each evening it returns to its nest, no lights, no stage, no cheers. And that simple, humble rhythm lets it live lightly, peacefully and long. The peacock, once breathtaking, dies quickly. Not because it was weak, not because fate was unfair, but because pride in its beauty made it blind. It mistook beauty for a shield and forgot that every shield must be held with vigilant hands. It forgot that in nature, survivors aren't the most splendid, but those who know when to hide. Its death wasn't the hunter's doing. The arrow was only the final drop that overflowed the cup. The real cause was self-satisfaction that seeped into every step, every fanned display. Pride erased fear. Without fear, it forgot defense. It became the perfect target standing in the open, like a gleaming bullseye, dazzling and still. And that is no different from us. When you're too busy making yourself stand out, you stop seeing who's aiming at you. When you focus too much on image, you forget to protect yourself from life's undercurrents, jealousy, upheaval, hidden waves. You mistake admiring looks for safety when they're only stage lights blinding you to arrows in the dark. The crow lives because no one watches. The peacock dies because too many do. This simple, harsh lesson holds true whether in an ancient forest or in today's modern society. You see, showing off always attracts risk. Like stage lights, the brighter the more they dazzle your eyes, and the more sights lock onto you. The more you stand out, the more easily you become a target. Not because you're wrong, but because light always casts shadows, and in those shadows wait envy, resentment, and invisible arrows biding their time. So in Buddhism, we often remind one another, what is precious hide, what is true stay quiet. A real jewel doesn't need to hang in the marketplace. It remains priceless, even hidden in the earth. You don't need to shout for others to know your worth. Real worth isn't what people can see, but what you quietly cultivate inside each day. Beauty is not true value. What people admire today may be what they forget tomorrow. You could make the whole world adore your appearance, but if you're empty inside a single small upheaval, a failure, a hurt, a shock, and everything collapses like a sandcastle in the rain. By contrast, those with real worth are often very quiet. They don't need lights or applause because their strength is within unseen, yet it holds them up whenever storms arrive. That very quiet strength is what carries them far, while those who only shine on the surface often fall early. I have met many people, radiant as peacocks. They stand out, talented, sharp-tongued, lighting up any room they enter. They draw every eye, making everyone turn. But let one life storm pass an upheaval, a failure, an unexpected misstep, and all that light goes out because they lack the inner foundation to stand when the lights go dark. Meanwhile, the humble, quiet, soft-spoken are often the ones who weather storms best. Because they don't need to display themselves to survive, they don't waste time guarding an image or preserving glory. They can pour their energy into living true, deep, and steady. They don't build castles from other people's gaze, but lay brick by brick with persistence, mindfulness, and enduring inner strength. And when sudden winds rise, when castles made of light collapse overnight, it is they, the seemingly dim ones, who remain standing. Outer lights can go out, but the light of a humble heart never flickers away. Have you ever wondered why a rice stalk bows lower the more grain it holds? Because the more mature and truly valuable one becomes inside, the less need there is to show off. An empty stalk is what lifts its head arrogantly in the wind, while the heavy, full stalk quietly bends, not from weakness, but from fullness. People are the same. Those who must strain to craft a flashy exterior to be noticed often don't have much within to keep. Those with genuine inner power don't need to parade it because they know value isn't in what's seen, but in what is patiently cultivated each day, like a golden rice stalk under the sun, quietly offering itself without seeking praise. Thus, knowing how to stay hidden is a kind of wisdom, not because you're timid, but because you're clear-sighted enough not to waste energy on meaningless performances, to keep your heart steady amid praise and blame, and not to turn yourself into a target for envy. And knowing how to stay hidden is also a kind of compassion. You don't make others bow down to see you. You quietly lift them with your real worth, like the bowed rice stalk that doesn't lower itself to self-demean, but so that anyone passing by can reach out and be nourished by that very quietness. When you step into the world, you'll see countless lights calling you, urging you to shine, to stand out, to be admired. From glossy social feeds to honeyed compliments, everything pushes you to become a glorious version of yourself, to be accepted. But remember this: the only thing truly worth protecting is not your outer image, but your inner steadiness. Let what is most precious in you be quiet, like seeds deep in the soil unseen, not needing fanfare yet day by day, quietly nurturing a durable vitality, quietly preparing for seasons of flowering and fruit in silence. Don't turn yourself into a proud peacock fanning your splendid tail in the open meadow, only to become the perfect target for careless arrows. For people's eyes forget quickly. No one will gaze at you forever, but you will have to live with yourself forever. So choose peace over prominence. Choose humility over pride, because in the end, the lights will go out, the applause will fade, and only a heart that knows humility can live long, live deep, and stand firm through all of life's upheavals. Back then, in the heart of a splendid, prosperous city, where the streets were paved with glossy white stone and golden oil lamps burned bright through the night, there lived one of the wealthiest men in the region. His name was always spoken in a hush, mingled with admiration and envy. People said his wealth stretched like a small kingdom, vast rice fields, heavy with grain, great merchant fleets sailing out with rare goods, and luxurious shops in the priciest spots at the city center. He wasn't just rich, he was so rich that people believed nothing could shake him. And precisely because of that, he began to want more than wealth itself, absolute admiration. One late autumn morning, after receiving the year's record profit report, he sat back in a gold-carved armchair in the grand hall, gazed out at a garden carpeted with red leaves, and said in a quiet but decisive voice, like a verdict, "I don't want a party. I want the whole world to remember this night." Those words were like an order. The machinery of his wealthy empire moved at once. For weeks afterward, his mansion turned into a massive work site. Teams rushed in and out, carpenters raising a stage, embroiderers from the highlands sewing silk drapes, silversmiths forging candle stands polished like mirrors. Lanterns were hung from the arched main gate all the way to the back courtyard, each made of the finest silk embroidered with delicate gold thread. White marble columns were wrapped in deep crimson velvet, soft as clotted blood. Long dining tables were draped with Italian lace. At each corner sat a bouquet of imported flowers replaced 3 times a day, so not a single petal would wilt. Crystal wine glasses studded with jewels were lined up in straight rows like an army of light. Crates of precious spices, blocks of smoked meats from other continents, strange fruits that had to be transported in their own carts so they wouldn't bruise. All streamed through the mansion gates like an endless waterfall of wealth. He even had a solid silver fountain built in the courtyard, just to decorate for a single night, then dismantle. As the fateful day drew near, the whole city began to buzz, as if a storm were forming in a clear sky. He's throwing a party, the biggest party in the city's history. And then, the night arrived. The sky was a spread of black velvet, and in its center, his mansion blazed like a giant burning gem. Elegant carriages queued all the way down the street. Servants in uniforms embroidered with gold thread stood in rows, bowing to each noble guest. Stepping down merchants' officials, aristocrats, renowned scholars. Polished shoes gleamed. Formal wear shot through with silver thread. Long cloaks trailing over the shining marble. The great gate opened, and inside was a royal dream light from hundreds of candles reflected off crystal, scattering into shimmering rainbow bands on the walls. Music surged, violins, trilling drums, thundering like silver waves breaking on cliffs. Dancers from a distant capital spun in shimmering silks, bodies supple as smoke. Crystal glasses clinked sharp and clear, blending with ringing laughter filling the hall. And at the center of it all was he. He sat on the highest armchair, crimson velvet curtains behind him, a hand-woven Persian rug underfoot, a goblet of red wine rippling in his hand. His gaze swept over each guest like an emperor reviewing his subjects. Chest lifted back straight, his face shone with pride. In his mind, he imagined that they admired him, that they whispered about his greatness, his hospitality, his power, that tonight history would inscribe his name as the richest, most generous man of his time. But what he heard wasn't the praise he'd been waiting for. At first, it was only a few vague whispers like mosquitoes buzzing. Then slowly, they spread like oil stains, seeping into every cluster of people, every corner of the hall. When he passed by, conversations suddenly stopped. Eyes slid away, but the low voices threaded the air like gray smoke. I heard the candles alone tonight could feed a village for a month. The leftovers will probably outnumber what the poor here eat in a whole year. He's certainly rich, but it seems he wants to show off more than share. He faltered. At first, he thought he'd misheard. Then, as his eyes swept the crowd, he realized no one was looking at him with admiration. There were cold looks, disdainful looks, envious looks, eyes seeing a man burning money to buy the gaze of the world. No one spoke of his success or hospitality. All they whispered about was waste. The music kept playing, the silks kept spinning in the light, but in his head, everything seemed to sink into silence. Those small remarks echoed like stones dropped in a deep well, ringing on and on. He sat back down, but his spine suddenly felt heavy, no longer proud as before. The wine lost its sweetness in his mouth, leaving only a bitter ash aftertaste. And he suddenly understood. Tonight he hadn't made people remember his greatness. He'd only made them remember how a man can scorch others' hearts with the fire of his own showiness. In that moment, he felt cold, not the cold of night, but the cold of loneliness amid a laughing crowd. Appearances do not create respect. You can make people gasp, but you cannot make them truly revere you with mere splendor. Respect doesn't sprout from what dazzles, but from what is quiet, kindness, simplicity, and a heart that thinks of others. Lights can make you stand out, but it's how you live that makes others want to bow to you. People may look up at a blazing star, but they truly trust the quiet lamps that light the way in the dark. No show, no applause, just a silent glow for others. The rich man in that story thought that if he displayed his wealth, people would see him as a great figure, would admire him for his brilliant success. But what he received were cold eyes and whispers behind his back. Words no one dared say to his face, but everyone thought, he just wants to show off. And once people think you just want to show off, they stop seeing your true value. That's human nature when they believe your every move is to draw attention. They no longer care about what you truly worked to achieve. Your achievements turn into a stage, and they see only the lights, not the sweat, not the effort, not the heart behind them. You can impress for a few minutes with your exterior, but for lasting respect, you must touch people's hearts with your character. Not with lavish banquets, but with sincere care, with how you treat those with less power, and with living simply even when you can afford extravagance. In the end, people will forget what you wore, what you drove, how luxurious your home was. But they will never forget how you made them feel, and that is what plants the seeds of true respect. Have you seen this in real life? A friend buys an expensive car gleaming in the sun and floods social media with photos. But what others talk about isn't the years of effort he put in, not the sleepless nights or stubborn perseverance, but he just wants everyone to know he's rich. Or someone throws an extravagant birthday party, candles thick as stars, wine flowing like a stream. Yet afterward, what lingers isn't joy, but hushed comments, wasteful, showy, all for show. That's today's reality, a world that urges us to express ourselves, but never explains how thin the line is between expression and showing off. You think you're inspiring, but in others' eyes you might be boasting. And once they start thinking that admiring looks quickly turn into envy, suspicion, even contempt. Why? Because admiration grows from inspiration. When people believe you succeeded through real effort, they respect you. But once they sense you're merely trying to impress, they no longer see your journey, only your ego performing under the lights. And in this society, lights are short-lived. Today they applaud, but one misstep, and they'll be the first to turn away, because they were never truly connected to your inner worth. So the scary part isn't that people don't know how good you are, but that while you're busy proving you're good, you accidentally lose what makes you respected: sincerity, simplicity, and true depth of character. Showing off breeds envy. When you step onto a blazing stage to flaunt, you reveal not only what you have, but also the gap between you and others. That gap makes people not want to come near. Instead of feeling inspired, they feel compared small, pushed to the margins. And the natural response when people are placed lower is not admiration, but the urge to pull the one above down to their level. Even if they can't, they may quietly hope. You won't rise any higher. You may think you're winning admiration, but you're only igniting a slow fire of jealousy within them. And jealousy never creates respect. It creates distance, cold eyes, whispers behind your back, and smiles that look warm, but secretly await your fall. The irony is, the more you show off to be recognized, the more you lose the chance to be truly recognized. People cannot respect someone they envy. Respect is born from closeness, empathy, and feeling inspired. Showiness destroys all of that. So if you truly want others to hold you in esteem, don't climb onto the bright platform. Stand quietly beside them and let your true value shine on its own without display. Simplicity is what nurtures gratitude. When you live simply, others don't feel threatened. They don't need to compare to shrink from feeling lesser. They can approach, talk, listen, and connect with you as a companion. Simplicity makes you approachable, sincere, easy to be around. And that closeness is what makes people genuinely cherish you, not because you're above them, but because they feel at peace around you. By contrast, showing off raises an invisible wall, keeping others from coming close or revealing themselves for fear of comparison, of being looked down on. If the rich man had hosted a simple gathering, instead inviting guests to sit around a plain, long table sharing stories of his journey, raising a glass to thank those who walked with him through hard times, perhaps they would have truly celebrated him. Perhaps they would have gone home with warm eyes and grateful hearts, not with jealous whispers trailing behind. People aren't moved by excess. They're moved by sincerity, wrapped in simplicity. When their hearts are moved, they feel gratitude. When their hearts feel threatened, they only want to step away. I've seen truly wealthy people, and they're often very simple. They don't cloak themselves in designer brands every day, don't need cheering crowds, don't need every eye to follow them. They have nothing left to prove because they understand real value isn't in what's seen, but in what they quietly create. They know the most precious thing isn't what they own, but how they use what they have to ease others' suffering. They use money to fund scholarships, build hospitals, nourish dreams that lack opportunity, not to build stages for the ego to dance in the spotlight, because they know wealth only matters if it helps someone be less pained, less afraid, less hungry, less cold. On the other hand, those who must constantly prove they're rich are often afraid others won't see their worth, because inside, they're not steady enough to trust themselves, so they borrow outer glitter to draw attention to fill an inner void. But true value needs no proof. Like a lotus seed deep in the mud, it doesn't show off, yet it's fragrant. Unseen, it quietly grows, breaks the surface, and when it blooms, its scent finds the hearts that know how to cherish it. True value is the same, unshowy, unboastful, but enduring and long-lasting. Looks may make people look, but only the heart makes people bow. What makes you worthy isn't what you display to impress, but what you quietly give to ease life's burdens. Outer light may dazzle for a moment, but only warmth from the heart lingers long in others. So don't become that rich man at his party, sitting amid blazing lights, yet drowning in cold solitude, because everyone around came only to look, and no one truly wanted to stay. Outwardly, he had the whole world, but inside he was so empty, he didn't have even one true friend. Choose to live simply because simplicity is the harbor of gratitude. When you live simply, others don't see you as a wall to climb, but as a hand they can hold. Simplicity makes you warm, likable, and real, and from there, respect sprouts naturally without being forced. In the end, respect doesn't come from the light you emit, but from the warmth you leave in others' hearts. People may forget what you showed off, but they will never forget the sense of peace they felt beside you. And that feeling is what keeps them by your side for a long time. Long ago, in a prosperous village nestled along lush green hills, there was a woman famed throughout the region for her radiant beauty. Each time she stepped outside, the marketplace seemed to pause for a beat. The clatter of knives on cutting boards fell silent. Even the chickens seemed to crow more slowly. Other women looked at her with a mix of envy and admiration, and the men couldn't hide their captivated glances, as if a brief smile from her could make them forget the way home. She married fairly young, a gentle, hard-working but poor carpenter. On their wedding day, the whole village buzzed. People whispered, "With looks like hers, and she marries a carpenter with sawdust on his hands. What a waste." But she only smiled, eyes shining with faith. Love will fill every lack. At first, life was modest, yet strangely warm. Their small wooden house always smelled of pine resin and the faint scent of toasted bread. Every morning, her husband pedaled to the workshop, and at night, he never forgot to carefully heat water and dry her towels whenever the weather turned cold. One day, she came home after a rainstorm, dress soaked. He awkwardly used the shirt on his own back to dry her hair, as if she were a delicate treasure. But then, the years passed. Her beauty bloomed ever more like a peony in spring, while their life still circled within the same old wooden house, and something quietly changed. She began to compare. Compared to friends with wealthy husbands carried about in gleaming carriages, compared to those who had servants comb their hair at dawn and gold flashing on their wrists, her life felt like a gray smudge on a brilliant painting. She began to look around and saw herself as lacking. From there, pride slipped into her heart like moss slowly covering a stone floor. She no longer looked at her husband with tender eyes, but with a cold, superior gaze, as if he were the one keeping her from shining. She mocked his calloused hands, the very hands that had carefully nailed each small plank to build a roof for the two of them. She criticized the simple meals he cooked, the same meals that had been their quiet happiness at the start. She curled her lip whenever he spoke with his plain country accent, the voice that had once been what calmed her most each evening. She began going to town, more dressing, more lavishly, laughing louder. Meanwhile, he still quietly came home each afternoon with a small bouquet of wildflowers and still smiled at her as he had when they first married. But every word, every cold frown from her was like a needle thrust straight into that man's heart, the man who still loved her with all he had, even though what he had now seemed no longer enough for her to notice. And in the very days that seemed her brightest, the first crack silently appeared like a hairline fracture on the ornate mirror she looked into each morning. And she had no idea. Can you imagine living with someone who day after day looks down on you, sees you as a burden, deems you unworthy? How painful that is. That pain isn't loud like arguments, not blazing like betrayal, but smolders quietly, gnawing away bit by bit at one's faith in oneself. The husband did not complain. He didn't shout back nor storm off in anger. He kept working hard each day, returning with calloused hands and a forced smile, quietly patching each leak in the roof when it rained quietly, adding more wood to the fire so her hands wouldn't be cold while cooking. He loved her not with promises, but with small, steady deeds. Even so, his eyes grew sadder, his back slowly bent, not from age, but from cold words, indifferent sneers, from the weary look of the person he had once considered his whole world. Being scorned by strangers can be endured, but being scorned by the one you love most, that is a silent pain that can choke a heart. And worse than anything, when love isn't cherished, it doesn't shatter with a bang. It dies slowly, in silence, like a small oil lamp going out at night, because no one adds oil anymore. Then one day, disaster came, like a storm sweeping across the village, sudden, fierce, leaving no time to react. A great fire broke out at the market by the village gate. Strong winds hurled embers red as blood, flinging them over dry thatch and wood in the drought season. In an instant, the village sky was ablaze, as if the sun had fallen to earth. The husband rushed out, face drenched in sweat and ash, trying to get to his woodshop. But the flames were faster. The crackling explosions of dry boards shattering in the heat, the choking stench of burning pine resin rose in waves. In a moment, the place that had held his sweat and quiet years collapsed into a heap of black charcoal. Their savings of many years, every coin he had set aside, every piece he had patiently crafted, each chair and cabinet he had cherished like a child, vanished into ash in a heartbeat. The wife stood frozen in the yard, eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. The fire didn't just consume the workshop. It seemed to burn away the vain dreams she had once cradled. And then, in the moment of her greatest panic, she realized something that hurt even more than loss. No one came. The friends who once swarmed around her whenever she wore a new dress, who clinked glasses with her at lavish parties, vanished as if they had never existed. No one asked after her. No one reached out a hand. Not a word of comfort, not a single sharing glance. She stood stunned amid the ashes, and for the first time, the world's silence chilled her to the core. She suddenly understood the people she had tried so hard to impress, those she had compared herself to, the glittering world she'd longed to join, had never truly seen her as part of it. They only came when she was beautiful, when her presence made them feel more refined. But when she fell, they left, without a backward glance. On the first night after the fire, when the village had sunk into darkness thick with the smell of ash, she sat slumped under the eaves of the ruined house, eyes vacant as if her soul had been swallowed by the flames along with the charred wood. The night wind blew through skin-prickling cold, carrying the smell of smoldering coal and the faint clatter of tiles falling. Her husband stepped toward her. In his hands was an old coat with frayed edges mottled with small burn marks. He said nothing, no reproach, no soothing, no complaints. He simply bent down, placed the coat over her shoulders, and sat beside her, as if he had always been there before and after every ruin. His rough hand gently held hers, the hand once heavy with bangles, once raised to show off at elegant parties, now bare, icy, and trembling. She broke down crying, not tears for lost possessions, but the tears of someone who finally sees clearly, who remains when everyone else has gone. For the first time in years, she truly looked at him, not as a poor man, not as the shadow she had scorned, but as the only person still holding her hand amid the ashes when the whole world had turned away. In that moment, she realized the most precious thing wasn't the gold and silver that were gone, but a heart that didn't leave, even though it could be hurt the most. Material things change. Loyalty endures. Gold and silver can be lost. Houses can burn. Fame can vanish overnight. No possession is permanent. Life's tides shift like waves high today, swept clean tomorrow. But if you tend to it, Loyalty will remain like a tree sinking roots deep into the earth. It doesn't show off, doesn't glitter, but it's what holds you up when all the outer shine collapses. When every door closes, only the hand of the one who shared your leanest days is the hand that doesn't withdraw. Sadly, most of us realize this too late. We chase what can be counted and shown, and forget to nurture what seems invisible, yet outlasts everything, like fidelity, like love, like quiet sacrifice. Only when we've lost it all standing in the ashes do we look around and see the one who remains is not the one who admired us, but the one who once split the smallest loaf with us. Material things are temporary, but loyalty, if you cherish it, is the true home no storm can carry away. Arrogance destroys family happiness. You don't need a third person. No great catastrophe, just a few daily slights, a few cold looks, a few curled lips, a few comparisons, and even the most beautiful love will wither like a flower, no longer watered. Because love doesn't die from lack of money. Love dies from lack of respect. People can get through poverty together, eating rice with tears and still finding it tasty, but they cannot survive days of plenty while being looked down on, treated as a burden deemed unworthy. Are you perhaps letting pride slip into how you see your loved ones? Have you looked down on someone who once set aside their own dreams for you, so you could live more comfortably, only to now see them as less than you? Have you forgotten that the person beside you today could disappear at any moment, like a book snatched by the wind before you can read the last page? Don't wait until they leave to realize love isn't automatic. It's a fragile gift that must be cradled every day, and pride even a little can shatter it forever. Cherish the person beside you before it's too late. Because if one day they go, you won't find another who loves you the way they did. No one will endure your indifference forever. No one will stand outside the door of your heart, patiently knocking, waiting for you to smile and open up. Love, no matter how deep, has limits, not because they suddenly stop loving, but because no one can live forever with the feeling of being not good enough, not worthy of love, caused by being continually belittled by the one they love most. Coldness, indifference, and pride, like tiny drops of water, seep in day by day, wearing down patience, faithfulness, and trust. After losing everything, the wife in that story changed. She no longer cared about dresses, no longer craved impressed looks from strangers. She started cooking simple meals with her own hands, sitting with her husband in the newly rebuilt house of rough wood, and she felt at peace, a kind of peace she had never known when living in the glow of outward glamour. Because now she understood, the most precious thing isn't being admired by the whole world, but having one person who, even when you've lost everything, still quietly holds your hand and won't let go. And the sad part is, we often understand this only when that person is no longer there to hold our hand. I hope you won't wait to lose something before you learn to cherish it. Don't wait for the roof to collapse to know the worth of the one who helped you lay each brick. Don't wait for the bed to feel empty and cold to realize how precious the warmth beside you each night was. The person with you today may not be perfect, may not be rich, dazzling, or smooth-tongued like in the movies. But if they still quietly rise early to make breakfast so you don't have to rush, still quietly, listen to your small stories even when they're tired, still quietly stand by you when life turns its back, then they are the greatest treasure in your life. The problem is, we often recognize the value of diamonds, but overlook the value of the hands that quietly keep them safe for us day after day. We get so used to someone's presence that we think they'll never leave, but the truth is, everyone has limits, and no one can stay forever with someone who doesn't appreciate them. A treasure doesn't need to sparkle to be valuable. A true treasure is someone who, without show, still quietly protects you, and a treasure should not be scorned. Take a long, careful look at the person beside you. Try setting aside the shortcomings and little irritations, the slightly clumsy way they speak, the shirt not yet ironed, the meal not perfectly seasoned. Those grains of sand aren't the whole desert, because who knows? While you're sighing and complaining, they may be quietly changing bit by bit, learning more patience, working harder, softening their edges just to become a better version for you. Don't let a nitpicking eye blur the important truth someone still gets up half an hour earlier to prepare the day for the family. Someone listens even when tired. Someone always turns back at the door to check if you grabbed a raincoat if the lock is secure. These small things aren't loud, but they're what keep a home warm. Don't wait until it's gone to realize that was the one person who was truly genuine. By then, a lifetime of tears won't bring them back. Feelings can't bear repeated contempt. A kind heart can't stand forever outside a slammed door. If you still have the chance today, choose to say thank you. Offer a hand to hold frown one less time. Open your heart a little wider and see that happiness isn't found in the perfect partner, but in two people who keep trying day by day a little at a time for each other. I want to tell you an old story. A story about a young man who once believed that with strength alone, he could have everything: fame, respect, and the highest place in the crowd. But he was wrong, because when he fell, what he needed wasn't strength, but the hands that had once wanted to lift him back up. Long ago, in a small village tucked in a lush green valley, there was a young man famed throughout the region for his extraordinary strength. Since the days he ran naked to swim in the stream, he had been different from children his age. While other kids struggled to drag small logs, he could lift stones that grown men needed levers to move. As he grew, he was like a living statue carved from muscle and sunlight. His shoulders were as broad as an old tree trunk, and each step seemed to make the ground tremble. His voice boomed like a drum echoing through the village at night. Whenever he passed, children stole glances, eyes bright with admiration. The adults nodded with pride, seeing him as the village's honor. But then, that admiration became a slow, smoldering spark. Because he didn't know how to keep people's respect, he thought that to be admired, he had to constantly display his strength. He began to turn his strength into entertainment. Every morning, at the busiest hour of the village market, he would appear like an uninvited guest everyone had to notice. He'd walk straight to the center, where rice barrels as big as half a person were being hauled, then bend down and fling them into the air as if he were lifting a handful of straw. The crowd clapped and cheered. His eyes lit up. He wore a triumphant smile. From then on, he had to find a new performance every day. He challenged anyone passing by: tug of war, arm wrestling, stone lifting, tree climbing. Not to train, but just to prove no one was stronger than he was. And each time he won, he threw his head back and shouted, pride echoing across the market. "See, no one here can match me." At first, people still laughed and clapped, thinking it was just a joke. But the laughter faded and their eyes grew cold, because every time they lost to him, they were mocked. Every time they watched him win, they were reminded they were inferior. And no one wants to be near someone who always makes them feel small. His childhood friends, who once played with him by the stream, now veered off when they saw him from afar. The men who used to nod proudly when he passed now kept their heads down, shouldering their loads, not bothering to look up. The children who once gazed at him with sparkling eyes now glanced briefly, then ran off to play elsewhere. In just a few seasons, the pride of the village became someone people avoided, and he didn't understand why. The more he showed off his strength, the thinner the crowd became. The louder he proclaimed his victories, the colder the air around him grew like an invisible mist. He didn't know that what makes people admire you isn't strength itself, but the feeling of being inspired by that strength. Yet instead of inspiring, he made them feel small, belittled, constantly needing to protect their self-respect when standing next to him. And no one can love someone who always makes them feel ordinary. One day, he stood once more in the middle of the market, hoisting 2 heavy water barrels, one in each hand, and shouted out his feet. No one stopped to watch. Only the rustle of wind through the leaves and the indifferent eyes of a few vendors packing up their stalls. He stood there, drenched in sweat hands, shaking from the strain, and for the first time, he felt lonely. People were still there, but their admiring looks had vanished. All that remained was the cold emptiness between him and everyone else. And then, a strange feeling crept into his heart, duller than sore muscles, the sense that no matter how great his strength was, it couldn't pull anyone closer. It could only push them farther away. Have you ever met someone like that? Someone who, even when you share a small joy, has to jump in with an even bigger triumph. Someone who turns every conversation into a quiet competition, who's smarter, who makes more money, who's more respected. They don't listen to understand. They listen for a chance to one-up you. Such people may be very strong, very talented, very outstanding, yet they are always alone, because no one wants to be around someone who constantly puts them on guard, who constantly makes them feel small. You can't build trust or nurture connection on a foundation of hidden competition. Others may respect them for a while, but won't truly bond with them, because ultimately, people don't seek each other out to compete, but to be themselves without being forced to outperform just to belong. And when you only care about being better than others, you'll end up with no one beside you to keep walking forward. Then came the spring festival, the biggest of the year, when the whole valley gathered to celebrate, compete, and wish one another peace for the new season. Amid the colorful stalls, lively dances, and drums pounding since early morning, the arm wrestling board in the square became the festival's centerpiece. The young man glanced at the roster and smirked. Here was his chance to prove once more that he was the strongest, not just in the village, but in the region. He strode forward, his voice booming over the drums. I will defeat everyone. No one here is strong enough to beat me. His opponent was an older strongman from the neighboring village, brawny, but with calm eyes, steady as a morning lake. He didn't shout or wave his arms to show off, only nodded gently when his name was called. The signal drum sounded. Their hands locked on the thick wooden table. The young man's strained veins bulging on his neck, face flushed red breath, pounding like it would burst his chest. He poured in everything, teeth clenched, arms shaking violently. The older strongman stayed composed, eyes on their hands, each muscle moving like a slow but certain current. The crowd roared, stomped, and cheered around the platform. Then a dry crack sliced through the noise like a cold blade. The young man's arm bent at a wrong angle. He fell back hard, breath caught. A cold sweat broke over his face, drained pale with pain. The cheering stopped at once, leaving a sudden stark silence. He looked up, panic in his eyes, searching for the faces that once shouted his name, waiting for them to rush over, lift him, comfort him, worry for him. But no one moved. Old friends turned away, pretending not to see. Those he'd beaten slipped back into the crowd eyes, indifferent. No one asked how he was. No hand reached out. Shaking, he pushed himself up in the center of the square where his name had once thundered like a storm. Now only the wind fluttered limp flags and the indifferent eyes of those who had once marveled, but had never truly cared for him. You know, that was the moment he understood a painful truth and the most important lesson of his life. Strength can never replace character. You can make people fear you with what you have: power, talent, wealth, physique, or intellect. But fear is not affection. People may bow before your strength today and turn away quickly when you fall tomorrow, because strength creates distance. Character creates connection. You can crush others to stand above them, but when you fall, no one will be there to lift you. By contrast, those with character don't need to win every time. They always have people who want to walk with them, to support them when they're weak, to stand by them when they stumble. Strength may win you applause, but only character wins you love. And only when you are truly loved will you never be alone, even if you fall in the middle of a crowd. Showing off makes us lonely. It sounds simple, yet many realize it only when it's too late. People may applaud when you're on stage under glittering lights, speaking proudly about yourself. They may clap, they may cheer, but that's temporary praise, not lasting connection. Because behind those ovations may be distant looks, guarded hearts, even quiet hurt. If you've ever used your spotlight to overshadow others, used your victory to mock their losses, used showiness to make them feel small, then even if they clap, their hearts have already stepped back. Each time you brag that you're better than others, you don't just raise yourself, you push them away invisibly, one step at a time. And when you fall, you'll see those retreating steps have become a vast distance. You'll look around in desperation, but no one will be close enough to reach across and pull you up. Because no one wants to save the person who made them feel unworthy to stand beside. Humility is what gives you companions, and everyone who truly goes far understands this. Humble people don't need to prove they're strong all the time, so they don't turn every conversation into a contest or every relationship into a match. Because they're not straining to be better than others, they can use their strength to lift others up instead of pushing them down to shine alone. And here's the wonder: people want to be near such people. With them, no one has to hide their weaknesses. No one fears being made to feel small. The humble don't need to win every competition, because they know the greatest victory isn't standing on the highest podium, but still having friends at your side, holding your hand, smiling whether you win or lose. Strength may take you to the top faster, but only humility keeps you from being lonely when you get there. Because in the end, the longest journey in life isn't about going the farthest, but about not having to go alone. In today's world, you're constantly pushed to be outstanding, to excel, to be better than others. Everywhere tells you to keep advancing, to let no one pass you, to become the leader. But remember, no one really wants to stay close to someone who only wants to be above them. When you're only climbing, you end up stepping on the very hands that once reached out to support you. When you're too busy proving you're better, there's no room left to listen, to care, to understand. And when you finally reach the top, you'll realize it isn't the wind that makes the summit cold. It's that no one is standing there with you. Go fast, and you can go alone. But to go far, you need companions. And people only want to walk with a humble heart, not a proud ego that makes them feel small. The humble don't need to shine the brightest, yet someone is always willing to walk with them in the dark. It's those quiet steps taken side by side that keep you steady when fame, achievements, and glory all fade. The young man in the story took many years to heal his arm, but what was harder to heal were the relationships broken by his former arrogance. Wounds can be bandaged, bones can be set, muscles can be trained back to strength. But a heart that once hurt others, if it wants to touch hearts again, must do so gently over time and with real sincerity. He had to learn to say, "I'm sorry," not just in words, but in humble actions. He had to learn to listen instead of challenge, to listen, to understand others, not to find their weak spots. He had to learn to use his strength to lift others, not to make them feel inferior. Only when he truly changed did the once cold eyes begin to warm. Those who had left slowly returned, not to cheer his strength anymore, but to walk alongside a person who now valued them. Only when he let go of his proud ego could he reach others' hearts again and regain true friends. I hope you don't need a painful fall like his to learn. This strength doesn't make you great, only humility does. Because when you fall, strength itself cannot lift you. Muscles, fame, achievements, all the things that once drew gasps won't come near, won't reach out a hand, won't wipe the sweat from your brow. Only people do that, the ones you respected, supported, and made feel safe by your side. And only if you have bowed to them, treated them with sincerity and humility, will they be willing to bend down beside you when you collapse. Because no one wants to lift up someone who only ever looked down on them from above. Strength may win you applause, but it is humility that builds bridges of connection, so that when you stumble, hands will be ready to cross those bridges and come to you. And that is true greatness, not being admired, but being loved. There's an old Zen story, very short, but sharp as a cut, through the illusion of anyone who still believes talent alone is enough for success, that I want to tell you. Because in truth, what's decisive isn't how skilled you are, but whether your heart is humble enough to learn and worthy of being entrusted with responsibility. Long ago, among ranges wrapped in mist year-round, there was an ancient academy hidden deep in an old bamboo forest. People in the region called it the Bamboo Staff Academy, where an elderly master had lived in seclusion for decades. He was famed throughout the land, not only for knowledge as deep as the sea, but also for a magical staff passed down through generations of masters. They said the staff had a spirit. In an ordinary person's hand, it was only a dry piece of bamboo, but if placed in the hand of someone with a heart clear as spring water and humility like the earth, the staff would shine, And that person could do extraordinary things, see into the essence of things, open the doors of knowledge, and understand what lies far beyond human limits. Many people crossed forests and streams to study there, but very few were actually chosen by the master to try the staff. Fewer still truly made it shine. Among his young disciples, one stood out above all. From the very first days, he amazed everyone. He learned fast, as if swallowing each character. He could remember everything the master taught after a single hearing. In debates, his words were sharp as a blade, refuting anyone with force and precision. In martial practice, he was powerful. In calligraphy, he was fluid. Whatever he did, he excelled, as if born to win. His fellow students began to whisper, "Surely he'll be the one to receive the magic staff." No one could deserve it more than he does. And those whispers planted a dangerous seed in his heart. At first, he only felt proud. Then pride turned into arrogance. He began to look at those who learned more slowly than he did with contempt. When someone answered wrong, he laughed out loud. When he saw someone flustered, he flashed a mocking glance. He no longer studied to understand, he studied to be better than others. And in his mind, a voice grew louder. "The master is only testing me. Before long, he'll have to give me the staff. Clearly, no one in this academy deserves it more than I do." One late autumn afternoon, as golden bamboo leaves drifted down before the eaves, he could no longer contain himself. He burst straight into the master's room without knocking, voice ringing. "Master, I am ready to receive the magic staff." The study was silent. The last light of day fell across the old wooden table where the elderly master sat still as a statue. He looked at the young man for a long time. His gaze was neither angry nor scolding, only lightly sad like autumn wind. Without a word, he rose, walked to the wooden rack in the corner, took down the time-darkened staff, and laid it gently in the young man's hands. The young man grasped it, heart blazing, as if at the start of a coronation. But nothing happened. The staff lay still cold, like a lifeless stick of wood. He frowned and tried chanting the spells he had learned. Still nothing. He swung the staff, spun, once struck the ground hard. Only a dry thump. No light, no vibration, no magic. Veins rose on his brow, teeth clenched. He tried everything he'd ever heard others say, but the result was only absolute silence. Face flushing, ashamed and furious, he flung the staff to the floor and snapped, "You deceived me. This staff has no power at all." The master stood there calm, as if he had long foreseen this scene. He bent down, picked up the staff, dusted it off, and spoke slowly, voice light as mist but sharp as a knife. "I did not deceive you. This staff is only spiritual for those who know. They have never been worthy of it." He froze. His face burned. His ears rang, his throat clenched so he couldn't get a word out. Then he suddenly turned and ran from the room. It was the last time anyone saw him at the academy. He vanished as if he had never existed, leaving only the echo of arrogant laughter lingering somewhere in the bamboo courtyard. Years passed. One spring morning, as the sun just lifted the veil of mist, a former student returned to the academy. He had studied in the same cohort as the young man of old, but was his complete opposite. He was the slowest in the class, the clumsiest. Each time he dropped a book, he blushed and bowed to apologize. Each time he answered wrong, he merely nodded, accepted the mistake, and took notes without a single excuse. He had never surpassed anyone, but he had also never given up, and he had never mocked anyone. He stepped into the master's room, gate quiet. He bowed deeply and said softly, "Master, I don't dare ask for the magic staff. I only hope to continue learning if you still permit." The master looked at him for a long while. Then he smiled a rare smile, gentle as early spring sunlight. He rose, went to the familiar wooden rack, took down the staff that had lain still for so many years, and placed it lightly in the student's hands. And a wonder occurred. The instant his fingertips touched it, the staff shone, not glaring, but warm and gentle like a ray of sunlight filtering through thick clouds. The light didn't burst like fireworks. It spread slowly like an underground stream, soaking into the earth. He stood still, heart pounding. The light didn't make him feel more powerful. It made him feel smaller. The master nodded slightly and spoke in a voice deep as wind through bamboo. The staff does not choose the most skilled. It chooses the one who knows he still needs to learn. Outside, the bamboo fronds swayed lightly in the breeze. Bird calls gathered under a clear sky. And in that old room full of morning light, a new transmission began, not from the strongest, but from the most humble. Arrogance loses blessings, not because the master plays favorites, nor because the magic staff chooses by whim, but because a haughty heart shuts the door on its own blessings. When someone believes they deserve more than everyone, they stop opening themselves to learn. Every piece of advice becomes an insult. Every critique turns into a thorn that rouses anger. Everyone around becomes merely those beneath for them to stand above and look down upon. And at that very moment, their growth stops. Their talent, no matter how abundant, gradually becomes an empty vessel, outwardly precious, but unable to hold even a drop more within. A vessel with no room, even if made of gold, is useless. Ironically, the arrogant often think they stand above others, but in truth, they only stand alone. They don't realize that each person they scorn carries a fragment of knowledge, a seed of blessing, a lesson they will never receive, because they closed their heart before drawing near. Blessing doesn't come from intellect, talent, or outward achievements. Blessing comes only to a heart that can still bow, still say, "I don't know enough," still learn from those around it. And when that heart is lost, no matter how gifted someone is, they will dry up like a stream without new rain. Not for lack of ability, but for lack of humility to keep growing. Talent without virtue is useless. You may be brilliant, may make others marvel at what you can do, but if you use that talent to make others feel small and inferior, people won't want to stay around you. They may clap when you're on stage, but inside, they'll only hope you slip and fall, because no one wants to lift up the person who made them feel beneath him. The talented disciple in the story didn't understand this. He thought success meant surpassing everyone and standing alone at the summit. But true success isn't standing higher than everyone else, it's being lifted by everyone, because they believe you deserve it. And what makes others willing to lift you isn't talent, but virtue, the humility to listen, the kindness not to make anyone feel belittled, the patience to walk with others and leave no one behind. You can go very fast on talent, but you can only go very far on humility, because when you fall, and everyone falls sometime, talent can't lift you up. Only people who felt respected by you will kneel to help you rise. Without virtue, talent becomes a blade. And sooner or later, that blade will turn and wound you. Not because you're not gifted, but because you're too gifted for anyone to still want to walk with you. Thus, you'll be alone. Success requires a heart that knows how to learn. Only when you dare admit you don't know enough do you truly open the door into a wider realm of knowledge. Conversely, when you believe you already know it all, every piece of advice becomes noise, every suggestion an offense, and you turn yourself into a full cup, unable to take one more drop. In life, those who go far aren't the ones who know the most, but those who keep learning every day. They understand the farther you go, the more you must learn. The higher you climb, the more you must be humble. Knowledge keeps changing, and the world keeps shifting. So if you stop, you'll be left behind, even if today you're very capable. And only when you bow your head to learn will others be willing to lift you. No one wants to elevate someone who thinks he's above all. Everyone wants to walk with someone who respects them, listens to them, and is willing to learn from them. True success doesn't lie in how much you know, but in how willing you are to keep learning more. A heart that learns is the clearest sign of a soul large enough to hold success. In this society, most people want to be exceptional, outstanding, different. We're taught to stand out, to surpass, to make a strong impression, as if self-worth were measured only by standing above others. But the truth is, what truly takes you to the top isn't making others smaller, so you look bigger, but widening your heart to embrace what you don't yet know. Those who only compare to be better than others stay confined to a narrow race with them. Those who open up to learn don't need to compete because they're on a broader, deeper, longer path. When you know you still have much to learn, you don't feel ashamed to ask. You feel grateful. There's still room to grow. And that very attitude makes others want to guide you farther, because no one wants to lift a proud ego, but everyone wants to support a humble, eager to learn spirit. The magic staff of life, whether it takes the form of opportunity, success, or knowledge, chooses only those who know they are still learning, never those who think they already know enough. If you are striving to rise, remember, don't only train your skill, train your heart. Talent can help you move fast, but only virtue keeps you standing firm for the long run. Many young people ask only, how do I become better than others? And forget the more important question, how do I become more worthy each day of what I've been given? Because the time will come when someone wants to place into your hand their magic staff, a great opportunity, an important position, a heavy responsibility. And what they weigh isn't how strong you are, but whether they can trust your heart. Talent without virtue is like a sharp sword, without a sheath, impressive, but liable to wound at any moment. No one wants to hand a precious chance to the arrogant, but everyone is ready to lift up someone humble who cherishes what they have. And that's why only a humble heart is truly entrusted with power, because the humble don't use power to prove themselves. They use it to serve, to uplift, and to spread what is good. Long ago, in a fertile plain, there lived a young farmer in a small village tucked between rice fields stretching out like a golden carpet. His life was simple but peaceful. Each morning, while mist still blanketed the narrow paths, he carried his hoe to the fields, bare feet sinking into the cool mud. At noon, he came home with a sweat-soaked shirt, lit the stove to cook rice, blue smoke curling over the thatched roof, blending with the warm scent of dry straw. He wasn't well off, but he always had enough to eat and wear, and there was always a look of calm in his eyes the look of someone who knew he was living in rhythm with the land, the seasons, and nature's cadence. Until one day, everything changed. It was the biggest market day of the year. People from distant villages poured in. Street cries and laughter mixed with the clacking bells on the livestock pulling carts. The farmer leisurely led his old ox to the market to trade for some new rice seed, and unexpectedly, his eyes were caught held fast by a sight he'd never seen. In the center of the market yard stood a white buffalo. Its coat was bright as freshly polished silver, reflecting the sunlight in a dazzling glare. Its eyes, jet black and deep, like two beads, looked around with an unusual pride. Its steps were strong and steady, as if one stride could pull the whole sky along. A crowd gathered, whispering, marveling, with constant exclamations of never seen anything like it. The farmer's heart pounded. He had never seen a creature so beautiful. A bold thought flashed through his mind like a spark catching dry straw. If I had that buffalo, the whole village would see me differently. I wouldn't be just a poor nobody anymore. I'd be someone people respect. That thought took root quickly. He didn't hesitate. That very day at the market, he sold nearly all the stored grain in his shed, then ran home and mortgaged the little garden by his house, the only property his parents had left him. That evening, villagers saw him return with the white buffalo beside him, bright as a harvest moon, a golden bell dangling at its neck. From that day on, his life changed course. He no longer rose early for the fields. Instead of holding a hoe, he held a bristle brush, carefully grooming each gleaming white hair. Instead of standing on his plot, he stood along the village road, leading the buffalo slowly, as if reviewing troops, soaking in every admiring glance. Passers-by gasped. Children ran after him, shrieking with delight, and the men watched with eyes mixed with admiration and envy. And he lifted his head, high chest puffed out, as if he had become a great landowner. But along with the praises, his fields began to change. He sowed more sparsely. He plowed less. He believed that just owning a prized buffalo would make the harvests abundant on their own, no longer needing the hard labor of before. He told himself, "Who still needs to put their hands in the soil when they already have a buffalo that makes the whole village bow their heads?" Yet the seasons still came as they always do, neither hurried nor slow, showing favor to no one. And the fields did not grow better rice just because of a prized buffalo. Weeds began creeping like a torn rug, spreading out, encroaching on the furrows left idle. The soil dried and cracked, long fissures like scars no one soothed anymore. The rice plants grew sparse, yellowing bowed low in the wind like defeated soldiers. Meanwhile, his neighbors still bent their backs under the sun hands, swiftly cutting heavy sheaves of grain. Sickles clinked brightly, and laughter echoed across the golden fields. But his field, only stubble remained, a few brittle stalks clinging to the ground as if grasping at the last bit of pride. He panicked. He began rising early again, but his hoe struck the ground only to kick up dry dust. He tried sowing seeds, but sparrows came and ate them clean. He called the buffalo to the field, but it only stood there looking at him, those deep black eyes indifferent, as if it had never known mud. And he understood it was too late. No one marveled at the white buffalo anymore. People no longer stopped to look at it. They just glanced quietly and shook their heads as they passed his barren plot. A prized buffalo is useless if its owner won't plow. That sentence light as a passing breeze fell heavy as stone in his heart, because he knew they were right. His prized buffalo, no matter how beautiful, only stood still. It couldn't pull the plow by itself, couldn't sow seed, couldn't turn admiration into fragrant white grains in a pot of hot rice, and his empty stomach couldn't eat other people's admiration. The eyes that once marveled couldn't warm a cold winter. And on the last evening of the season, as the crimson sun sank behind the bamboo hedge, the young farmer sat down in the middle of his parched field, watching the white buffalo stand silently in the sunset like a statue of silver. He suddenly understood what he should have known from the start. Without mud-stained hands, there will never be white rice, and no prized buffalo can do that for you. Possessions cannot feed you if you're no longer diligent. You can own the most precious things and make others marvel. But if you don't work, don't keep cultivating those things, will only sit there like lifeless displays. In today's society, this is truer than ever. You might have a luxurious house in the priciest neighborhood, a sports car gleaming under the lights, a title that makes everyone look up. But none of that can generate new value if you don't keep working every day. Assets don't reproduce themselves, only diligent hands, a mind that keeps learning, and a heart unafraid of hard work can do that. Many people have climbed to the top, then fallen quickly, not because they lacked luck, but because they thought past achievements could feed them forever. They sat back to enjoy, gradually forgetting that what they had was built from sweat discipline and sleepless nights. And when diligence disappears, wealth slips away like sand through your fingers. Like the farmer in the story, he thought simply owning a rare white buffalo meant he could rest easy, but the fields don't bloom because of his pride. Heavy sheaves grow only from mud-stained hands, not from the crowd's admiration. Remember, true value isn't in what you've accumulated, but in your ability to keep creating new value every day. Because in the end, without diligence, all possessions, no matter how precious, are just beautiful, but useless. Showing off always makes us lose focus, the most valuable thing for producing any result. The farmer in the story used to be the most diligent in the village, out in the fields at dawn, while mist still blanketed the paths. His furrows were straight, each seed pressed into the soil with care and hope. But from the day he got the rare white buffalo, he stopped looking at the soil and only looked at other people's eyes. That's when everything began slipping from his hands. When your gaze sticks to admiring looks, you stop seeing the small but crucial things that must be done every day. Things no one applauds, no one marvels at, but that quietly form the foundation of success. When you let your mind be drawn into making others pay attention, you gradually forget what once made you begin passion, discipline, diligence, and gratitude for each small step you've taken. Ask yourself, are you sometimes like that too? Pouring all your time into polishing your own prized buffalo, a car, a title, an achievement, so others will marvel, while the fields that truly feed you are quietly running dry. The truth is, every hour you spend showing off is an hour lost from sowing, and the harvest, like the turning wheel that waits for no one, will never pause for you to make it back in time. So if you want real results, return to your plot of land, instead of staring at other people's eyes. Work is the true root of every result, as old as the earth, but never outdated. Not the prized buffalo, not the crowd's admiration, and certainly not the glittering titles on your wall. All those are just outer ornaments. The only thing that can turn dreams into food and clothing hope into reality is each drop of sweat falling to the ground, each mud-stained hand that keeps at it every day without giving up. Success doesn't sprout from what you show off, but from what you do quietly. Those unseen hours of work, those late nights no one knows about, those times you fail and silently stand back up on your own. Fields don't grow from boasting. They grow from farmers who keep their heads down day after day without rest, because they understand a simple yet profound truth. The seed you sow today sprouts tomorrow. No sowing, no harvest, no plowing, no season. And so it is with life. You may have all kinds of advantages, but if you don't work, they're just empty shells. On the other hand, if you steadily cultivate, no matter how small your start, you'll eventually reap your own golden harvest. In the modern world, you're constantly pushed to show people what you have, as if your worth were measured by likes, admiring looks, or glossy photos online. But be careful, because that urge, if you're not mindful, quietly becomes a trap. If you only display, you'll forget to develop. If you only care what others see, you'll forget what you yourself need. You may own white buffaloes, special talents, resounding achievements, ample assets, a reputation others envy. But don't let them distract you from what truly matters daily: steady hard work. What you show off exists only in fleeting glances. People will marvel and then forget, admire, and then turn away. What you work for exists in real life, in the food you bring home, in the skills you hone to stand firm in turmoil, in the quiet foundation that keeps you from collapsing when your fortunes turn. Flashiness can get you noticed, but only persistence keeps you going. So spend less time proving and more time planting, because what you quietly sow each day is what will feed you for a lifetime. The farmer in the story, after that failed season, quietly led the white buffalo back to market to sell it. No one marveled like before, only a few pitying looks, a few murmurs of regret. But he didn't care anymore. With the little money left, he bought a few sacks of seed, an old plow with a chipped blade, and returned to his cracked field. The next morning, while the air was still dim with mist, he went to the fields. No more tinkling bell around a prized buffalo's neck, only the scrape of the plow biting into dry earth. Furrow by furrow turned over his hands, calloused sweat falling into the soil, like quiet drops of blood. No one stood at the edge of the field watching him. No one took photos. No one clapped. Only the morning wind, the mud, the scent of straw, and a new resolve sprouting in his heart. A resolve to live honestly, without needing admiration. Months passed, and the fields revived. Weeds gave way to tender green rice shoots, and then one day, the first heads of grain bent heavy in the golden sun, the wind whispering congratulations. He looked over the field and smiled quietly, not with his head held high for others' eyes, but with his head bowed in gratitude that the earth and sky had answered his effort. Because he had understood, fame cannot feed you, only labor can. Applause may come and go, but rice in the bowl, grain in the granary, come only from hands that plow and plant every day. And from that moment, he no longer needed to prove anything. He only needed to live truly and live steadily. Before you lose a harvest in your own life, pause and take a hard look at what you're holding. Maybe it's a job that once filled you with passion, a relationship that once made you happy, or a talent that was once your greatest pride. But ask yourself, are you truly nourishing it each day, or just using it to show off to the world? Because anything left unattended will wither. Love without tending grows cold. Talent without honing fades. A career without care hollows out. And when harvest time comes, you'll be left with bare stubble, not because you lacked luck, but because you forgot to sow. On the other hand, if each day you quietly plant small seeds, a bit of persistence, a bit of effort, a bit of humility, then even if no one is watching you, we'll still reap a bountiful season. No need for oohs and ahs, no fireworks, because the greatest reward isn't praise. It's living in the abundance you created with your own hands. Long ago, deep in a silent forest, there was an ancient Zen monastery nestled on a mountainside, appearing and disappearing in the mist, like a dream. Each morning, white mist covered the gray-tiled roofs, and droplets clung to the tips of the Bodhi branches like tiny crystals. Forest birds sang brightly in the still air, and the temple bell echoed slowly like the heartbeat of heaven and earth. That monastery was famous throughout the region, not only for its serene scenery, but also for its abbot, a strict, composed master whose gaze was as deep as an old well. Locals often whispered that Master has never praised anyone and has never rewarded any disciple, because he always taught practice isn't to outdo others, but to lessen the ego within ourselves. Among dozens of disciples, there was a young man who stood out not for eloquence or a striking appearance, but for his quietness. From the day he stepped through the monastery gate, he was always the first to rise. Before the forest roosters crowed, he quietly swept the courtyard, each stroke of the soft broom like a caress across the earth. While the well was still veiled in mist, he carried back buckets of water for the entire monastery, rope marks pressed into his shoulders. At meal times, he cooked rice, tended the fire, washed the dishes without a word of complaint. And every evening, after everyone had fallen asleep, he would sit in meditation beneath the ancient Bodhi tree in the courtyard, posture motionless like stone eyes, empty and still as if seeing through the night. His brothers all loved him. They whispered to one another, "Surely the master must be very proud of him." As for the master, though he never offered praise in his heart, he quietly kept an eye on the young man. 10 years passed like a bird cutting across the sky. 10 seasons of Bodhi leaves fell and then sprouted again. He never took a day of rest. Then one morning after the early meditation session, the master unexpectedly summoned him to the main hall. The air inside was so still he could hear his own heartbeat. The master looked at him slowly, eyes deep as if seeing through the clouds draped over the mountain. Then, from an old wooden chest, he took out a strange object, a small pillow wrapped in shimmering golden cloth, glinting in the morning light, like a little sun. He handed it to the young man and said slowly, "You have practiced with great diligence. Take this pillow and rest a little." The whole monastery was abuzz. In 10 years, no one had ever been praised, let alone rewarded. And today, that person was him. He bowed deeply. His hands trembled as he received the golden pillow, pride surging in his chest like a rising wave. From the day he received the pillow, something very small changed. And from that very small change, his whole person began to change. Before, he always slept on a rough mat, went to bed early, rose early, and woke while it was still dim. But once he had the golden pillow, he began lingering longer each morning, telling himself, "I've worked hard for 10 years. A little more rest won't hurt." At first, just a few minutes, then a few dozen minutes. Then he overslept through the morning schedule and skipped the first meditation. He no longer rose to sweep the courtyard. no longer carried water, no longer sat quietly beneath the Bodhi tree as before. Instead, he lay stretched out on the golden pillow eyes, gazing out toward the courtyard where his brothers bustled about. A vague feeling rose within him. I'm different from them. The master has acknowledged me. I deserve to rest. The golden pillow, seemingly inanimate, was whispering dangerous, sweet words into his ear. Can you imagine just one word of praise? Just one small reward awoke within him, a sleeping monster named arrogance. Praise easily breeds arrogance, because when people believe they are more special, they begin to permit themselves more laziness. And once laziness becomes a habit, all prior effort turns to ash on the mountain wind. One morning, after the bell had sounded 3 times, while the courtyard rang with the footsteps of disciples sweeping leaves, the master passed by his room. The door was ajar. Inside, he was still fast asleep, his head on the golden pillow, as if embracing a treasure. The master stood in the doorway for a long time. His eyes were sad, like looking at a flower withering in spring. Then he spoke a single sentence, short but cold as a blade. The golden pillow has swallowed you. The young man jolted awake, horrified. But it was too late. That afternoon, when sunset reddened the forest, the master called the entire monastery to gather in the courtyard. The last light of day dappled every face. The evening wind stirred the Bodhi leaves with a rustle like a sigh. The master spoke slowly, each word dropping like a stone into a well. From today on, you are no longer a disciple of this monastery. He stood there, stunned. No one defended him. No one held him back. Because everyone knew he was no longer the one who had patiently swept the courtyard each morning. No longer the one who had quietly carried water under the midday sun. No longer the one who had sat unmoving through the cold night. The golden pillow had stolen his beginner's mind. And once the beginner's mind is lost, every title, every reward, becomes meaningless. As he stepped out through the monastery gate, a light rain fell cool as the forest's tears. The golden pillow lay in his room silent, as if it had never shone. Abandoning practice is losing yourself. What made him fail wasn't weakness or lack of ability, but forgetting that the path of practice is not a race with a finish line, where whoever arrives first wins. Practice is a journey with no end. Each day we walk, each day we are only beginning again. He mistook the golden pillow for a reward after 10 years of effort, a marker proving he had finished, that he could now rest against his achievements. But in truth, the pillow wasn't a reward. It was a test of whether his mind was steady enough not to be seduced by what he had achieved. A test of whether he understood that cultivation never stops, that every breath and every step is part of the way, not a track leading to some trophy where we then stop. He didn't fail because he fell asleep on a pillow. He failed because he fell asleep on his own beginner's mind. When the beginner's mind is gone, every second of laziness doesn't just slow you down. It pulls you away from who you once were. In Buddhism, the most frightening thing isn't going slowly, nor stumbling. It's stopping in the middle and thinking you've arrived. When you stop, the river keeps flowing. The wheel keeps turning, and you stand still, drifting further behind. Awakening isn't a mountain you summit and plant a flag on. It's an endless forest. The farther you go, the more you see how much you don't know, how much ignorance still needs to be untangled. That's why giving up practice is giving up the chance to return to your clearest, brightest self. And when you lose that chance, you don't just lose the way you lose yourself, like that student who walked out the gate not only with his feet, but with a heart no longer his own. Perhaps you've been like him, not because you're weak, but because you're human. We all have moments when after a few small successes, we suddenly feel we deserve to stop and rest. We start loosening our grip on ourselves, doing a little less, moving a little slower, telling ourselves, I've worked so hard. Now I have the right to enjoy the results. But the problem is, the world doesn't stand still while you rest. While you relax, others are quietly moving forward. They aren't loud or showy, just steadily climbing one step at a time. And then one day, when you jolt awake and stand up, you realize you've been left far behind. I've seen many people like that. They had talent and opportunity, once stood very near the summit, and then lost everything simply because they stopped too soon. They didn't fail from lack of capability, they failed because they fell asleep to the sound of applause. The harsh truth is, when you stop, you aren't standing still. You're sliding backward because life waits for no one. Success isn't a destination, it's only a temporary stop before climbing higher. If you choose to stay too long, yesterday's success becomes the chain that ties you to the past. And when you look back, the sky peak you once dreamed of is now hidden behind the backs of those who never stopped walking. Daily wakefulness is the most precious thing. Not the golden pillow, not applause, not fame or achievements, but keeping a mind that doesn't forget. You are still on the road, no matter how far you went yesterday. In Buddhism, we often remind each other, a practitioner must begin again every day. Every dawn is a new starting point, and every step can be the first step or the last, depending on whether your mind is still awake. It's the same for people living in the world. Each morning, if you don't remind yourself, today I am still a student, it's easy to live as if you were already a master, and that's exactly when you stop learning and stop progressing. Achievements can get you honored, but only humility helps you grow. Those who still know they are learning can keep growing. Those who think they're finished will never grow again. When you believe you're enough, you stop cultivating yourself. And anything that stops being nurtured starts to die, not loudly or clearly, but surely. I hope you won't let any golden pillow steal your beginner's mind, whether it's praise, an award, a position, or some success. These things aren't bad, but they easily make you think you've arrived. And when you linger too long basking in glory, you stop noticing that the road ahead is still stretching on, and others are still walking. Arrogance is a soft cradle that lulls you to sleep, but this world never stops moving. If you fall asleep, you'll fall behind, not because you're lesser, but because you stopped walking. On life's long journey, no one falls behind for going slowly. They fall behind for stopping. So keep a heart that is always beginning, a mind that is always learning, no matter how far you went yesterday. Because true success isn't at the finish line. It's in your ability to keep moving forward day after day. The master did not expel him out of hatred, nor to ruin his future, but to truly wake him up to a truth. People often forget. No one can practice on your behalf. On the path of growth, no one can walk for you. No one can maintain your diligence for you. And no one can wake you if you yourself choose to sleep on your own golden pillow. No matter how compassionate a teacher is, he cannot save a student who has let himself go. Only when he lost everything status, admiring eyes, even the place he once called home, did he grasp a truth that seems simple yet painful. Real worth doesn't lie in rewards or in what others grant you. It lies in continuing to take the next step every day, even if no one sees it, even if no one praises you, even if no reward awaits. Only when you no longer need recognition, yet still keep moving, are you truly practicing. Because the real reward of the path isn't a golden pillow, but every single step you keep taking, quietly, steadily, and awake. Back then, in a bustling riverside town where straight rows of blue stone streets ran along the water and the wind carried the scents of cinnamon star, anise pepper, and coffee, there was a renowned merchant. He owned warehouses with red tiled roofs, like dragonflies at rest rows of wooden crates stacked like fortress walls. Fleets of sailboats running up and down the river, glittering glass front shops at the busiest intersections. His name arrived before the fragrance of his goods mentioned a major deal, and people mentioned him. And as if to seal that status every time he went out, it was a lavish performance. His carriage was as massive as a moving room panels, carved with dragons and phoenixes' wheels, rimmed in bright polished bronze reflecting the sky. Red velvet curtains hanging low with gold tassels trembling in the breeze. 4 tall war horses' manes, trimmed neat muscles rippling. The driver always whistled, shrilly, snapping the whip through the air, parting the crowd like a boat cleaving waves. As for him, in the newest cloak with a stiff collar, he perched on the high seat chest, thrust out chin, tilted his cold eyes, skimming the people in the street like he was glancing at a stream of lifeless merchandise. Whenever the iron wheels rolled over the paved road, a hard clanging rang out, followed by barked, rasping shouts. "Make way for my carriage, move you lot, get to the side." Those words sliced the air like a whip tearing through conversations, cutting children's smiles in half. Shopkeepers hastily cinched bags and pressed into the eaves. Porters, sweating, edged to the side. Mothers tugged their children to the walls, muttering prayers for the carriage to pass quickly. People feared him, feared the swagger of wealth, the condemning gaze of power, but no one liked him. They flattened themselves along the stone ledges, watching with quiet resentment. When the wheels vanished around the bend, only small sighs remained, like twigs snapping. This scene played out day after day, becoming a city habit. And like any habit, it dulled the senses. The more he yelled, the more people stayed silent. If anyone said you shouldn't, he'd smirk. "What am I doing wrong?" Everyone moves aside. He believed rank was a ladder, allowing him to stand above others, and wealth a pass to speak to anyone in a commanding tone. Yet within that red silk of power, a thin thread of loneliness had already been woven, one that only showed when some accidental tear appeared. That day, the sky was scrubbed clear sunlight, spilling in broad stripes across the road. The market fair was jam-packed. From afar, the familiar wheel clang rose again, clang, clang, like metal striking time itself. The driver whistled, cracked the whip. The crowd parted like water. The merchant sat ramrod straight, lips pressed in a proud line. The carriage skimmed past spice stalls steeped in cinnamon and star anise, past bolts of bright cloth, past a smithy spitting sparks. Then came a very slight jolt at first, like a heavy gust, making the velvet curtains shiver. He frowned. The driver hauled the reins. The whip sliced a thin line through the air. Right after that came a violent jerk. The body of the carriage pitched, suddenly metal screeched in a piercing howl, then crack a short dry sound cold as a blade snapping bone. The right front wheel split open, bronze spokes sprang out. The axle plunged down, and the whole carriage lurched and tilted. He was flung into the paneling, his white cloak. Dust-streaked hat, askew fingers clamped so tight on the armrest they whitened. The horse's shrieks split the sky. The driver staggered, face bloodless. The crowd rippled. Someone screamed, others dodged. Baskets of oranges rolled fruit bursting into segments. A pottery stall rattled glazed jars clinking. Amid the chaos, the merchant pushed himself upright, trying to reclaim his old imposing air, like slipping into a familiar coat. He snapped at the driver. "Clumsy fool. What kind of work is that?" Then he swung toward the street, his voice turning whip-hard again. "Why are you standing there? Come lift the wheel. Move." But his words dropped like a stone into a deep well. A shopkeeper pretended to hunch down and hurriedly pack up. A water carrier sidled around as if he hadn't heard. The kids he'd yelled at before, "Move, you brats," had scattered. Only a few little heads peeked from afar, eyes round with curiosity. The burly men nearby looked at one another, then looked away. The woman selling vegetables suddenly got busy, picking wilted leaves, hands trembling yet deliberate. No one approached. No worried eyes, only a few cold glances like passing breezes. Corners of mouths flicked up thin as thread into mocking smiles that vanished at once as if everyone feared being seen. The clatter of metal faded, replaced by a dense, heavy quiet. In it, he suddenly heard a sound he'd never noticed, his own heartbeat thudding slow and heavy. He looked around, faces that once lowered and pressed themselves to the walls now walked by upright, leaving hollow shadows behind. He who had always sat above everyone suddenly felt set down on a strangely low step, the step of someone standing alone. At last, he had to climb down. Dust clung to his hem. His shoes sank slightly into muddy mortar. He and the driver gripped the broken wheel, trying to push the carriage. It was heavy as a bronze block of memory inching forward, groaning over stone. Sweat ran sliding along his temples, gathering at his chin. His hands shook, not only from the weight, but from a surge of helplessness so wealth could not set a wheel upright. Status could not mend an axle. Shouting could not turn passers-by into friends. He was nearly buckling when a voice sounded behind him, light but clear. "Let me help." He turned. A thin man in a faded brown shirt, hands smelling of wood varnish, stood there. Sun-darkened face, steady, warm eyes. He recognized him a few days earlier. He had yelled at this very man to move his stall elsewhere, saying the rough carpentry stand cheapened the view for his customers. He'd said it like passing sentence. Before he could react, a woman vegetable seller stepped up, her worn, conical hat shading half her face. She said softly, "Let me wedge some stones first." Then, two dock porters came over from the riverfront forearms, roped with muscle sweat beading, giving a brief, wordless nod. An old blacksmith hobbled up with his hammer, grinning toothlessly. "Let me warm up a bit." They coordinated quickly. The woman slipped flat stones under the axle. The two porters heaved and lifted the carriage body. The smith braced a beam for leverage. The thin carpenter slid in to reset the wheel and chock it with a makeshift wooden wedge. It all unfolded under the high sun shirt soaked with sweat, yet no one complained. They worked together as if rehearsed, really just the practiced instinct of people used to helping each other with small market mishaps. When the carriage stood straight again and the 4 horse hooves rested evenly on the stone, their snorting eased. The driver tested the reins. The wheel settled for now on the wooden wedge. The group stepped back, exhaled. No one asked for payment. No one waited for praise. As for him, the man used to speaking, he suddenly had no words. He stood quiet for several long beats, hand still on the rim as if afraid to let go and fall. The market's rhythm returned, weighing haggling laughter. But within him, something had broken silently, like that earlier crack heard only by him. He looked at the thin carpenter and in his mind replayed himself, glaring, "Get away from my shop front." He looked at the vegetable woman, remembering how his carriage had once knocked over her tray, and he hadn't bothered to look back. He looked at the two porters and recalled calling them slow as turtles. He looked at the blacksmith and remembered calling the ring of his hammer lowly noise. The jagged memories were like iron filings, wherever they touched stung. He drew a long breath as if to swallow the lump in his throat. For the first time in years, he bowed, not to inspect the wheel, but to truly bow to the people who had just rescued him from an awkward predicament. His voice came out hoarse. "Thank you, everyone. No more barking, no more superior gaze. Only a flustered pair of eyes as if waking from a long dream about himself, where he sat too high to see other people's true faces and too high to see his own face reflected in theirs." The vegetable woman waved it off. "It's nothing." The blacksmith cleared his throat and turned away. "Next time the wheel breaks, stop by my forge and I'll weld it properly." The two porters laughed and shrugged. "Just be careful, boss." The thin carpenter only bowed, smiling gently with his eyes. No one brought up the past. No one weighed out debts of gratitude. They dispersed and went back to work, leaving behind in the street a strangely cool patch of light, the light of a lesson that had just happened on the paving stones. The driver awkwardly tugged the curtain, waiting for orders. The merchant hesitated, looked at the high seat in the carriage, then down at the sun-flecked road. He said quietly, "I'll walk." For the first time in years, he moved through the street on his own 2 feet, without the iron wheel's clang clearing his way. The river breeze blew by, carrying the scents of cinnamon wood and the sweat of labor. Eyes that once avoided, his now lingered a little longer, less wary. A little boy, clutching a carrot, peered from behind his mother, wide-eyed at the dust on the merchant's cloak. He smiled at the child, a smile he wasn't used to, a bit awkward, and walked on slowly. Suddenly, the old street held many new things. The blacksmith's hammer sounded like a heartbeat. The damp morning smell of greens seemed like a gift. The bargaining no longer felt noisy, but like a steady music of daily life. By evening, he returned to the carriage. The driver had found a welder. The wheel was off the axle, jacked up. He watched, not commanding, just asking what was needed. Now and then, he steadied something with his hand or hefted a timber. No one applauded. No one pointed. Everyone worked, and for the first time, he knew what it was to stand among, instead of stand above. When the wheel slid back onto the axle and the metal caught the last light of day, he laid his hand on the rim as if shaking hands with an old friend he'd only ever used for show. He turned to the workers, pressed his palms together. "Thank you all. I learned what I needed to learn." That night, the carriage rolled slowly toward the river. No horn, no whip, no shouting. The velvet curtains still dusty, the gold tassels less proud. In the cool dusk of the street, someone murmured to another, "He's different now, isn't he?" The other nodded. Different. Just a small nod, but enough for a man to begin again, like a wheel set back on its proper axle, ready to move on, not to run over anyone, but to arrive where he ought to go. From that day on, when his carriage passed, the iron wheels still rang, but now the driver called gently, "Please make a little room." And if someone was slow, the carriage stopped. The curtain lifted, and the man on the seat bowed. The street no longer split like water. It was wide enough for everyone. And the merchant, for the first time, understood what the city had tried to teach him for so long. Status is not higher than the human heart. Arrogance can make a whole street step aside, but only humility makes someone step forward when your wheel breaks in the middle of the road. Status is not above the human heart. That big carriage didn't get the merchant in this story even one helping hand when he needed it. That sounds ironic, but it's a simple truth. Many forget power, money, fame, all are tools, not the bonds that connect people. They can make others fear you, but they can't make them love you. They can force a crowd to step aside as you pass, but they can't make anyone stop when you collapse. We live in an era where people mistake admiration for affection. A luxury car can make a crowd look up, but it won't make them truly worry if you're stranded. A lofty title can make people obey, but it won't make them remember you when you quietly disappear. People extend a hand not because you're rich, but because they want to, because there's fondness, trust, and feeling in their hearts. And those things can't be bought with status. They're built through how you treat them every day. You can use power to force others to move aside, but you can't use it to force them to stay by your side. Hearts don't bow out of fear, they bow out of respect. And real respect doesn't come from you standing above them, but from your willingness to bend down beside them. That merchant once sat high, thinking the gap between him and the crowd proved his success. But when the wheel broke, that very gap became a wall. No one crossed it. No one helped, not because they didn't see, but because in their eyes, he had never seen them as fellow travelers, only as obstacles to be cleared. That's the tragedy of those who confuse power with worth. They can make a whole city flatten against the walls, yet can't find even one friend to stand with them. Don't wait until your life's wheel breaks to realize status is what makes people look up at you, but only hearts make them reach for your hand. Respect doesn't come from appearances, but from how people feel around you, that they're not belittled or pushed down, that you see them as human beings, not rungs to step on. In the end, your value isn't defined by how high you went, but by whether anyone is willing to walk beside you when you have nothing left to show. Arrogance isolates us, and the scary part is we often don't realize it until it's too late. You may think you're above it all when people step aside, but the truth may be, they just want to stay away. You might read the silence around you as respect, when in fact it's the cold emptiness of people who no longer wish to engage. The merchant in the story had everything: money, status, power, fame. But he didn't have a single true friend. Every time he passed, people pressed themselves to the eaves as if avoiding a sudden squall. No one wanted to meet his eyes. No one wanted to stand near him for more than a second. He mistook that for awe, for proof of his class. But in reality, it was a sign he'd been cut off from the community, isolated by the very glare he created. And when the wheel shattered in the street, he learned the painful truth: not a worried glance, not a hand extended. The price of pride is solitude. Only humility opens the door to help. The thin man that day didn't step up because the merchant was rich, but because he saw a fellow human being embarrassed and needing help. Only when the merchant was willing to climb down, brush off the dust bow, his head, and soften his voice did people come near. Humans don't respond to commands with compassion. They respond to sincerity. When you can say, please, people want to say yes. When you can bow, people are willing to reach out. Conversely, if you're used to giving orders standing above, forcing others to make way, then when trouble comes, the only thing you'll hear is silence. Not because people are cruel, but because you never made them feel valued. And no one wants to rescue someone who always treated them as beneath him. So if you want people who will stay when storms roll in, start by learning humility today while you're still standing strong. In today's world, almost everyone carries a desire to rise higher, climb the rungs of prestige, become someone others must look up to. Ambition isn't wrong. No one blames a seed for wanting to be a tall tree. The danger isn't in how high you climb. It's in forgetting how to bend down along the way. Because when you forget to bend down, you gradually lose all the hands that would have caught you when you fell. Every time you decide you're above, you push others a little farther away. Every time you stand on a pedestal looking down with a superior gaze, you widen the gap between you and those who once loved you. That gap grows quietly until one day, when you truly fall, no one remains on this side of the ledge to pull you back. You might think that in a crowded street, if your wheel breaks, someone will rush to help. But real life doesn't run on unconditional compassion. People want to help those who once looked at them with respect, not someone who spent a lifetime looking down. When you fall in a crowd, what makes you lonely isn't that no one sees. It's that no one wants to see you anymore. So be humble, not to be pitied, not to curry favor, but to keep yourself from losing the capacity to be loved. Because in the end, what keeps a person steady in life isn't a big carriage or loud applause. It's the small hearts that still want to walk beside you. The ones who will extend a hand to lift you up simply because you once bent down to take theirs. Once upon a time, in a small riverside town, there was a famed art academy known throughout the region for having trained many great painters. There, amid hallways scented faintly of oil paint and sunbeams pouring through soaring glass windows, a young painter stirred the whole academy from the very first day he stepped into class. His talent was nearly shocking. While other students were still fumbling with clumsy sketches, he was already swinging his brush bold and decisive, like wind sweeping a lake surface. Every stroke was both precise and daring. Every color field seemed aflame, and his compositions were so unusual that even the teachers squinted to look closely. In those first classes, when everyone hung their paintings for critique, his were immediately surrounded. Classmates stared wide-eyed. Some gasped, some swallowed in silence. Others sighed in discouragement, feeling the gap between him and them as far as sky and earth. And like wind fanning embers, those compliments made his ego flare into a blaze nothing could douse. He began to change. When a female classmate trembled through her first tentative lines, he glanced over and let out a derisive chuckle. When a boy misjudged a color tone, he sneered. Even a kid's drawing has more soul than this. When the teacher critiqued his work, he raised his chin, voice hard as stone. You don't understand my concept. My painting has gone beyond the mold. He didn't just say it. He truly believed it. In the months that followed, while his peers practiced each brushstroke, he plunged into making pieces ever more elaborate, flamboyant, and harsh. He no longer listened to anyone's feedback. Every time he stood in class, his eyes weren't on the canvas anymore. They roamed the room to see who was looking at him. Then, the biggest day arrived, the end-of-term exhibition, the Academy's grand event, where each student displayed a heartfelt work for the public to view and judge. Winners were often chosen for prestigious art troupes, opening the road to fame. He spent months preparing. His painting was a storm of color, a daring diagonal composition, fields of pigment exploding like fireworks into the viewer's eyes, lines as sharp as blades. He worked through the night, hands caked with dry paint, eyes blazing. When he laid the final strokes on the canvas, he stood still for a long time, intoxicated with pride. This time, I'll make everyone look up. On exhibition day, the gallery was packed tight. Warm lights poured over each painting, glittering on the polished tile. Viewers moved from piece to piece, murmuring softly, sometimes breaking into small gasps and brief applause that echoed in the space. He stood beside his painting posture, proud, ready to receive the familiar, admiring looks. But no one lingered. People glanced and moved on. A few frowned. An old gray-haired man stood for a long moment, then shook his head, sighed, and walked away without a word. No applause, no admiring eyes, only a cold silence heavier than criticism. He froze. His heart hammered, as if every whisper in the crowd were turning into needles. He forced a stiff smile, then quietly left the room while the exhibition was still underway. That night, when darkness had swallowed the corridors, he slipped back into the gallery. No voices. Only wind through the window glass and cold moonlight stretching across the floor. He stood before his own painting. For the first time, with no one around to look, judge, or marvel, he really looked closely. And suddenly he saw what he'd never seen before. The painting was very loud, very gaudy. Color fields stabbed the eye like flares. Lines screamed as if trying to rip open the quiet. And behind it all was a cold emptiness. No soul, no story, not a shred of sincerity. It was like a person shouting for attention without saying anything that mattered. He sank to the floor, back against the cold wall, hand covering his face. For the first time in his life, he clearly heard a whisper inside. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not as good as I thought. And for the first time, he cried, not because of failure, but because he realized that for so long, he hadn't really been painting. He'd only been trying to impress. He wasn't trying to touch others' hearts. He was only trying to make them look up. That night in the silent gallery, while other paintings slept quietly in the moonlight, a young painter sat for hours beside his own dazzling canvas and felt it had never been so empty. And that night, for the first time in many years, he admitted he was still just an apprentice. Conceit is a door that quietly closes off every path to learning. And the scary thing is, most of us don't realize it's closing until it's too late. The young painter had once painted very well, but each compliment was like a drop of honey in wine, swelling his ego without his knowing. He stopped wanting to listen to feedback. Whenever someone pointed out a flaw, he brushed it off with a smirk or slick excuse. He stopped visiting classmates' small canvases, works that might not have been perfect, but held the young souls learning to speak in color. He stopped looking, stopped learning. He was absorbed only in himself. That was the moment he began to stand still. The irony is that when pride rises, people often think they're moving very fast. very far. In truth, they're only circling their own shadow. They no longer absorb anything new, no longer leave room for wonder or curiosity, the only soil where creativity can sprout. Meanwhile, the friends he'd looked down on kept quietly at it. They weren't flashy, weren't loud, but day after day they diligently trained each stroke, listened to each critique, observed the subtlest shifts of color outside the window. They weren't busy proving they were good, so they had space to keep growing. He, thinking he was already enough, could no longer take another step forward. And one day, when he looked up, those once behind him had long since slipped past. Conceit doesn't just slow us, it makes us fall behind while we still think we're in the lead. That is the most silent tragedy of those who were once very good. Tearing others down never makes us better. That simple truth is one many forget. The young painter thought that every time he mocked a classmate's work, he was proving his sharp eye and superior thinking. He didn't realize that with each jab, he was eroding his own image in others' eyes. They didn't see a genius. They saw an ego so hungry for recognition, it had to step on others to stand a little taller. The truth is, belittling others doesn't lift you up. It only drags you down to your own pettiness. Every cutting remark is like a hidden snip severing the cords that connect you to those around you. Gradually, no one wants to come near, not because they're beneath you, but because being near you makes them feel small, looked down on, judged. No one can live long with that feeling. So the people who once wanted to walk with you quietly turn down another path. They'll seek out those who see their strengths, encourage them, and offer critique without wounding. Meanwhile, you, the one who once stood center stage, are slowly pushed to the margins. And the greatest tragedy is this: when you truly need honest feedback to improve, no one will want to speak to you. They don't want to be mocked. They don't want to be cut off. They don't want to throw their effort against a cold wall of pride. Criticism for its own sake won't lift you. It only burns the bridges that could carry you higher. If you want to go far, you need to build bridges with respect, gratitude, and the ability to see the light in what's still unfinished in others. Only when you make people feel safe to offer feedback do you truly get the chance to grow. Real growth starts with listening. That night, after taking his painting down, the young painter walked the gallery steeped in darkness and the faint smell of oil paint. No more crowd, no more whispers, no eyes following, only him and the works he had dismissed. He stopped at each one. Paintings he had once sniffed at labeled corny, old-fashioned, uncreative. For the first time, he looked with eyes that weren't defensive, weren't rushing to judge, weren't hunting for faults to cut others down. And something strange happened for the first time he saw. They had soul. They weren't loud or flashy or screaming for attention, but they told stories. A mother waiting for her child in a rainy afternoon. A gaunt father pushing a cart down an empty street. An old autumn rice field, small things as tender as a sigh. Those paintings weren't perfect, but they were sincere. No showy technique, but soaked with feeling. And he cried. Not because he lost, but because he finally understood all this time he'd been so busy trying to be outstanding that he'd never stopped to listen to anything but applause for himself. He realized, if you want to touch others' hearts, you first have to open your own. You can't create a work that moves people if your heart is shut tight, full of vanity and defensiveness. A closed soul can't absorb the world's beauty, and so it can't recreate that beauty on canvas. In life, we're no different. When the ego grows too big, we start plugging our ears. We listen to rebut, not to understand. We look to find faults, not to learn. Bit by bit, we become the smallest version of ourselves, thin-skinned, afraid of criticism, allergic to feedback, craving only praise. The paradox is only when you dare to listen do you truly grow. Every accurate critique, however painful, is a paving stone laid on your path. Every time you cover your ears out of pride, you're not standing still, you're sliding backward. You're smashing the very ladder you're climbing, tossing away your chance to rise. The truly skilled aren't those who never get criticized. They're the ones who keep listening, keep learning, keep correcting, and keep going even after stumbles. Those who only flaunt talent, belittle others, and shield their ego with proud armor will sooner or later stand alone in an empty room before their own poor painting and realize what they lacked most wasn't talent, but a heart willing to learn. Talent can make you stand out today, but only a learning heart keeps you standing tomorrow. And that begins with something that seems small, yet is the hardest listening. All roads of arrogance lead back to a familiar place, loneliness. The arrogant soldier collapses on the battlefield with no one to lift him. The proud peacock strays into the hunter's snare while the ugly crow glides free. The showy rich man, the haughty wife, the braggart strong man, the conceited artist. They all lose what's most precious, not because they failed, but because they believed they couldn't. In Buddhist teaching, the Buddha called that conceit, mana 1, root of ignorance. Conceit makes us believe we're above others, then shuts the door to learning. Conceit makes us forget that everything we have today is only conditions coming together, like clouds gathering and dispersing. And conceit blinds us to the simplest truth: no one can stand alone forever. We are all walking a path of impermanence. Glory, status, praise, success are just fragile sun reflections across water. Only one thing remains after all of it: how gentle, humble, and awake our hearts have become. So handle your ego gently. Don't let compliments turn into a golden pillow that lulls you to sleep. Don't let admiring eyes lure you off the path of self-cultivation. And don't let the fear of losing to others make you forget life's deepest aim: to be a kind, peaceful, loving human being. If these stories have touched you, share them to plant one more seed of compassion in the world. Please subscribe to Silent Moon Wisdom, click like, and leave a comment below about what awakened you most today. Because who knows, your small share might be the lamp that lights the heart of someone lost in the night. We'll keep walking together on the quiet path, where each humble step brings us closer to peace.